I'd like to call to order the October 4th, 2016 regular meeting of the Board of Education. Present is Mrs. Eileen Lou McCormick. Mr. Mark Patton is celebrating the holiday with his family at the moment. Ms. Donna Carnell, Mrs. Jessica Gerber, myself, Philip Dwyer, Mr. Anthony Calabrese, Ms. Tricia Pitko, Mrs. Jennifer Maxon Kennelly, Mr. John Llewellyn. So if I could all ask you to stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Our first item on the agenda is public comment for the public to address us on agenda items. Is there any member of the public that wish to come forward and speak? If so, come forward and state your name and address. Okay, thank you very much. I'd ask the board unanimous consent if we could take item 6B out of order, which is the review of modification of right of repurchase agreement for Board of Education offices at 501 Kings Highway East. The town attorney is here to discuss that with us and answer any questions that you may have. He's on the clock, so if I can move him up, that would be helpful to our finances. Do I have unanimous consent to so move the agenda item? Seeing no objection, so moved. Item 6B, review of modification of right of repurchase agreement for Board of Education offices at 501 Kings Highway East. That's enclosure number 3. And do you have comments that you want to lead off with? And state your name for the public, if you would.
Good evening, all. My name is Stanton Lesser. I am the town attorney for the town of Fairfield. I think this is the first time I've actually appeared in front of this board. I was asked to come tonight just to talk about this repurchase agreement, and Mr. Dwyer, you said that it's part of the package that everyone has? Okay.
Yes, item 3.
So very briefly...
entitled Third Modification.
The space that you occupy, your headquarters, this premises, is actually a condominium unit that was purchased by the town in 2002. And contained in that agreement was the right of the seller to repurchase this unit at a fixed price 10 years from the date that it was closed. And so I think the first repurchase came about in 2012, if my memory is correct. Let's just see here. And at that time, he did give notice of his intent to repurchase, and the town then negotiated with him an extension so that we didn't lose this space. I'm not sure that there was any place for you folks to go at the time, so that was negotiated. And since then, there has been one other extension just for a brief period of time, and then we entered into negotiations for this one. The extension that we've negotiated now has changed a little bit. It puts it out to 2026, 10 years from now, which means that the landlord or the seller doesn't have the right to buy it back until then. It changes from a fixed price to a fair market value, which will be determined at that time. And it also gives us the right on 12 months' notice to have him purchase it from us. So we can give the seller notice that in a year we want him to buy it back from us, and you get into the fair market value. So it's going to go to the appropriate boards. I think it's going to, I think tomorrow it goes to the Board of Selectmen, and then it'll have to go to the RTM. But if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Yeah, and the town charter dictates how leases are prepared and who needs to approve them. Could you kind of just expand on your last statement?
I will. This is a purchase. It's not a lease, but in any event, the first selectman negotiates. It gets approved by the Board of Selectmen. There was supposed to be what's called a Section 824 review by TPZ. I'm not sure if that's going to happen here, but it's just a report that they give, and then it will go to the RTM. And the 824 review, if it takes place, if they approve it, the RTM needs to approve by a majority. If they don't approve it, then it would take a 2/3 vote, but they usually approve these.
Okay. Questions from the board? Mr. Llewellyn?
Thank you. What's the current, so we have a document that references sections of agreements that we weren't provided, so there are a lot of, it doesn't give us a lot of information, but what are the, what's the current purchase price? We're moving from fixed to market.
Yeah, the current purchase price in the agreement was, hang on. About $4.6 million, 4.629392, which I believe was 20% more than what we paid, but I am not sure, so I don't want to, someone had told me that, but I don't know if that's for sure. But that's what was in the original agreement in 2002.
Okay, and what was the impetus for this modification?
So that he doesn't repurchase it from us and we push him out another 10 years, that we can continue to occupy this. But in the meantime, we do have the right to have him buy it from
Put it
us.
back
So
to him.
it gives us flexibility.
Okay.
There's one other provision that you should be aware of that's in the original agreement. In the event the seller does exercise the right, give us notice that he's going to repurchase it, we have the right to lease it for 5 years at fair market rent. So he can't just push us out right then. We would have the right to lease it.
And where we rent now versus fair market? Or do we have a feeling for that?
No. What fair market is now?
For the rent. So if he were to exercise his option today,
Yeah.
so what we're doing is we're
Well, he
buying
can't
ourselves-
exercise it today, actually. He's got to wait now. If this is approved, he can't do it for 10 more years.
But today he can, without this being approved.
No, actually, he can't, because the second right of repurchase pushed it out.
To when?
That I don't have. Hold on. It's in here, yeah. Hang on. I don't have that. I don't have the second right with me.
Well, if it is 2 years, as Dr. Tracy's saying, and then we have a 5-year option at that point, is that correct?
If it is, if, at the time he exercises,
He can't exercise for 2 years,
yes.
so
then
we have
would
5 years.
Yes.
So we have 7 years that they can't kick us out as it is now. So we're gaining an extra 3
We'd be
years.
able to, right. Well, we're actually gaining an extra 8,
How are we gaining 8, sorry?
pushed out 10 years from now, 2026.
Okay. And right now, he can't exercise that right for 2 years. And in 2 years' time, we get 5 years.
We'd get 5 years at the end of 2026 also.
Okay, and that's not in here either.
That's in the original agreement, which remains in effect.
And that goes back to my first comment. It's hard to read this in a vacuum.
Yeah, I
because
thought
we
that
don't
I
have
had
the
sent
agreements.
both, but there's just a couple paragraphs from that agreement that really apply now.
But that all makes a difference, if it's 10 years versus 7 years versus 15 years. I'm trying to understand kind of the impetus behind it, because the consideration is $1. What are we giving up, what are we gaining? So it sounds like we're gaining 3, maybe 8 years.
Yeah. We're not giving up anything.
Well, we're giving up a fixed price for a floating price.
Correct. That was at our request.
Okay. And so does this board need to approve this, or is this just notice?
This is informational.
Okay, thank you very much.
Any other questions from board members on the repurchase agreement? Mrs. Maxon Connelly?
Just one quick question, although you just alluded to it, regarding the move to the fair market value. That was, in what way was that more in the town's best interest than the fixed?
Well, you're looking at something that's 10 years in the future, and we spoke to some commercial real estate people who said you're probably better off going with, based on what the price of property is now, it's going to go up, so let it go to fair market value in 10 years.
Okay, right,
or
thank-
even, or less. I mean, if we decided we want to have them exercise, that, if somehow we were to find a place to go that was in our best interest, that's one of the reasons the 12 months is in there. We don't know that that's going to happen, but it gives us some flexibility.
Any other questions, Mrs. Maxon-Connelly? Any other questions from other board members? Going once, going twice? If you do have other questions, I'm sure Attorney Lesser
Give me a
would
call.
take calls from you if things have come up afterwards. This is for discussion purposes because it is the town who decides what property to either lease or buy for the benefit of the town. Mr. Llewellyn?
So just to kind of go back to that for a second, so the current assessed value is 2.6, with the town in its most revaluation a year ago at 3.7. So if we take a look at that, you're saying that the fixed right now is just under $1 million higher at 4.6, correct?
That's
So we're saying in 10 years, 900,000 is kind of the implicit gain, or basically a third.
If, I don't know if those numbers are correct, yes.
Okay. Well, for information only, thank you.
Anything further? If not, thank you very much for attending.
Thank you.
We welcome you back, 5 years from now when you make your second trip? Thank you. On to presentations, item 4A, we're back at the regular agenda item. Item 4A, District Improvement Plan, Annual Update. I think Dr. Tracy has some opening comments, and then we have a short presentation, and then we'll take Q&A.
Want to come up and join us at the table here? Appreciate it. Before turning the floor over to Ms. Parks and her colleagues, I just want to thank her and Dr. Boyce and Mr. Cummings and Ms. Leonardi for the work that they've done to pull this document together. When the Board of Education adopted the District Improvement Plan back in July of 2015, it required the superintendent to report on the status of the plan at the first October meeting. So that's why we're here tonight, including progress on performance indicators and recommended modifications. So this document that's in front of you tonight is in three parts. First, a description of activities against the plan to date over the first year, consisting largely of the information that Dr. Title pulled together prior to his departure back in June, with appropriate updates in the intervening months. Part 2 presents data on the student performance indicators, and Part 3, a couple of proposed modifications for your consideration. When I was studying up on the district in response to your invitation to come work for you for a little while, I was very impressed with the ambitious nature of this plan and the fact that there were so many measurable outcome indicators that were incorporated so as to track progress. And certainly a document of this magnitude generates questions. We've received several questions from some of you over the last day or two and have responded in writing at your places to many of them. And others that'll take a little longer, we will continue to work at. Having said that, let me turn it over to Ms. Parks for any remarks you and your colleagues may care to make, and then we'll take your questions.
And you're all old hands at this, but please do, for the television audience, introduce yourselves as you speak.
Okay, I'm Karen Parks, Interim Deputy Superintendent.
Mike Cummings, Director of Elementary Ed.
Meg Boyce, Director of Secondary Ed.
Andrea Leonardi, Director of Special Education and Pupil Services.
So I think the report is fairly self-explanatory. It's got a lot of information, so I really have nothing to say other than let's address your questions. I think everything in the report is pretty comprehensive. You all reviewed the report and the indicators 2 years ago, I guess, in the spring, and put
put together all of the indicators, and we've tried to collect as much data as we can and draw some conclusions after 1 year, which were tentative at best, because 1 year is not really a trend, and are giving you, we've presented it in a document, which I hope you like the format. We played around a bit. We have to thank Meg Brown for coming up with the performance indicator chart, which I think looks very nice compared to the actual chart in the plan. So go ahead with your questions.
Anything else? I'll take note that on page 31 is Part 3 for some proposed changes. I might suggest that the board focus its initial discussion on Parts 1 and 2, the report of what did get accomplished, and then when we've exhausted those questions and comments, we'll move on to Part 3. Who has some initial questions? And you may have lots of questions. I would ask you out of courtesy to your fellow board members that you ask some questions and then take a break so that other board members can participate in the discussion as well. Who's first? Mrs. Gerber.
Well, first, thank you very much for answering the majority of the questions that I put. I'm sorry it was so late getting them to you, but I really appreciate the work that you put into this. And one question I saw that wasn't answered that I just wanted to touch on, since you did answer most of them, is the question number 5, page 9, number 28. Just, I had a question regarding, going paperless, the report cards, progress reports, whatnot, just to see how extensively and if it's been repeated, kind of notifying parents, because I think there are still some parents out there who are still waiting to get something home with their child, and maybe aren't on Infinite Campus, so they don't get the notification to go to the website. So is there some way to make sure that we can get the percentage up to as close to 100% of parents as possible who know where to go, when it's coming, so that there's not that frustration?
Me to answer that?
Yes, because we don't do that at the high school.
It's a conscious effort, particularly as we get every year new students into all grades, but particularly kindergarten every year being brand new, and many of those families come in and don't have older children. So a lot of the communication happens at the school level. I know that in schools where there's a particular concern that people may not have online access at all, the schools open up and make available online access at the actual school location. We always, if need arises, things can always be printed out and sent home with children or have parents picked up, because we don't, we have to make accommodations for everybody at some point. So I think it's just a constant effort to continue to communicate that availability to parents and offer alternate access when we have to.
And I guess just one thing, I know that I talked to Mrs. Parks about this last year, just in terms of being able to post, and I know it's difficult with snow days and everything, but the end of the marking periods and when the report cards are coming out, and I know, again, those shift, but perhaps if maybe on the school website, when you do have the date, it could be posted there, just so that's one other outlet that, if someone's going to the website, it's right there in kind of the front page. So it would be easier for them to know, okay, I'll mark it down on my calendar to make a point to go to Infinite Campus to check on X date. So I just think that would be helpful.
Yeah, I think that's easy to do.
Great, thanks.
Other questions? Mr. Llewellyn, followed by Ms. Pitko.
Yeah, I just want to follow up on that, and then I'll yield the floor and come back later. In terms of moving things online, what are we defining as student records? Is that changing? What's our retention policy? I know in the past, I know our emails, for example, are deleted after 2 years. And then who has access? I know an email went out from Ken Lee to parents about Public Act 16-189 and the sharing of information with an outside firm as it related to Plato. So if we're moving everything online, what does that mean to the parents, their ability to access information?
So we still have a paper file, which we keep, and by state statute, that's required to be kept for 50 years for students. We consider that our permanent record because that contains transcript for the student, the health records for the student, any IEP records for the student. So parents can access most of the information that's in Infinite Campus through the parent portal. And that's how we attempt to share that information, other than what teachers share with the parents when they speak with parents or send home with students. Regarding the contracts, I'm glad you actually brought that up, because you will see, some of you, I don't know if we got it out today, but you'll be getting an email. One of the requirements of that statute is that whenever we sign a contract with a vendor who maintains any student data, either it's student data related to the student's identification or any student content, which would be anything that the student generates and is housed in that software or vendor's database, we have to notify parents. We have to post it on our website, and there is a new section on our website that posts all of the contracts that we enter as of October 1st. And the Edmentum Plato one, we just slightly changed the contract. We require state-mandated language in the contract about the vendor's privacy requirements. Should they have a breach, they have certain timeframes within which they must contact us, and we must contact the parents and the student. We've worked with our attorneys to get all of that contract language created, and we cannot sign a contract after October 1st with any vendor that does not agree to those terms. So Edmentum is the first one.
Right.
You'll see it on the website, and you should be getting, the other part of the statute is parents have to receive an email with information about the vendor and the contract.
And for example, with Edmentum, do they have access to all students or only students who are taking Plato?
Only students who...
Only their students, so to
Correct.
speak?
And in that particular case, there would be student content as well as student, because students respond to questions on that.
Okay.
Yes.
And then you had mentioned that parents have access to most data through the portal, but there's other data out there that, does that comprise student records?
For example?
You tell me, you're the one who said most.
Well, for example, we do not put students' score on every single assessment they ever take in a paper file. We house that in Infinite Campus, and we share that with parents either when the assessment is taken or at a conference if we think it requires a different level of explanation. And some of that data we actually post in the assessment tab in the parent portal on Infinite Campus. So, yes. Student grades, for example, parents can access through the parent portal.
So can parents access, are parents provided access upon request to student records that are not available through the portal?
Yes and no. Some information, yes. Other information. So we can't give parents administrative access to Infinite Campus because there's no way to do that without allowing the parent to access information for students other than their own children. That would be a FERPA violation, which would be very serious for us. However, so we may not, a parent may not actually be able to get into the database to see it, but we could certainly have a teacher sit down and share. For example, we had a request a year or two ago with a parent who wanted to see all of the common assessment data that had ever been taken on that particular child. We couldn't give the parent access to that, but we were certainly willing to have the parent sit down with an administrator who could collect the data and share it with them.
Okay.
So, yes.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're
If I
welcome.
could just expand slightly on the special education record, because it is slightly different.
Okay.
Special education records are housed in a separate file from the cumulative record because they have a higher level of confidentiality required by them. We maintain those records for 7 years beyond graduation. In that 7th year, we go through a records destruction process that is outlined in state statute that begins with the first selectman. We contact every graduate, tell them that their records are available for them to pick up at the 7th year. So we don't maintain, those records are not maintained beyond 7 years.
Okay.
But we do, they are at a higher level of confidentiality. Parents have the right to make an appointment and come in and inspect those records. Under IDEA, they have a right to one free copy of those records during the lifespan or educational span of their child, and we maintain and work with families on that all the time.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Ms. Pitko, Mrs. Gerber had one other question she wanted to ask before I come to you.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Through the chair to Ms. Leonardi, I just had a follow-up on the question I had about Walter Fitzgerald. Hearing you say that you're in the process of creating materials for other districts, plan to open the dialogue with other districts beginning in the second quarter. I guess my question is, I know you had mentioned, when this first came up in the spring, that there were other districts who had reached out to you. Have those districts, reached out again now that that's something that's in place? Like, do you think, I guess, how quickly do you think, potentially, could students be starting, say, in January, or?
That would be likely, the start date would be a January second semester, beginning of
Right.
second semester.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. And then the other question, too, is just in terms of, like, the report. I know there had been discussion when you and Ms. Donowitz were here about putting together kind of like a progress report as to where things were with Walter Fitzgerald. Do you have any sense of when we'll be seeing that?
I would imagine, certainly it would depend on working with the superintendent to determine when you would want to receive that report. We can certainly pull that together for you.
Sure.
For the November meeting, December meeting, whichever.
Okay. Yeah, I just
there's a
thought you had
lot
said sometime
going
in
on.
the fall. No, I understand.
Yeah.
I just didn't know if we had a specific date by which we were
There's
planning
no
on
specific date right now, but
getting. Okay. All right.
Ms. Pitko,
Can I follow up on that? She wants to follow up.
please. Mrs. Maxon Canalian.
I'd just like to reiterate Mrs. Gerber's point, because it was a question I had as well, that I know it was referenced in June that we would get, and I didn't know what the nature of the data was or what the nature of the progress report would be. I mean, I don't know that, but I know it was referenced in June. I thought it was going to be part of this district improvement plan, so I would just reiterate to the chair, to Dr. Tracy, that I would hope for that sooner rather than later, because it's definitely something that the board has been told we would receive.
All of the
November
schools
is
have
when
us-
we have normally kind of gone through, normally being the last 2 or 3 years, significant program changes contemplated within the next year's budget. So why don't we add it to the November meeting so that it's kind of program and program are similar?
And just to
Mr.
follow
Llewellyn.
up on that comment, it might be helpful to actually have it ahead of when we talk about changes, because it would be good to have digested that information if changes are going to be recommended. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, Ms. Pitko.
No problem. So my question goes to the comprehensive transition program from grade 5 to 6, 8 to 9, and I'm not sure who exactly can answer this. In
It might be helpful to reference the page of the,
page
Item.
3, number 5,
thank you.
develop a comprehensive transition program from grade 5 to grade 6 and from grade 8 to grade 9 to increase student success at grades 6 and 9. The report talks about instructional rounds, graduation transition process. My question is more of what is part of this comprehensive transition program is to the anxiety level that the students have. Like, how are we working to the social emotional part of going to a new school, adhering to the new grading policies, checking your locker, things like that.
Well, I'll start.
Okay.
Some of the things we tried to accomplish through orientation and having the kids visit to reduce the anxiety, social, emotional, additional, I'm going to refer to Ms. Leonardi, but I think that so if you notice, we're still working on this. Some of the things that we've discovered through looking more closely at those transitions are we actually recognizing all of the reading issues that we have? Are we conveying that information to the next level appropriately? We're doing instructional rounds tomorrow. In fact, a large group of people doing instructional rounds to try to look at some of the instructional strategies that are being used at the elementary versus middle school to try to see if we can ensure more consistency there. So there's a lot of things related to this that we're working on, And as we work, we discover more things to work on, which is a good thing. So let's see if anyone else has more to add.
We've really focused in on, as a teacher, you understand the tiered approach, and we look at it in 3 areas. So we have the tiered approach, universal transition activities. What do we do for all students? What do we do for students with just a tier 2 level of need in terms of transition? And then certainly we have far more extensive transition activities for kids with far more extensive needs for transition. We're also looking at that across not only what do students need in the transition, but what do families need. A family who is sending their first child to middle school needs something different than a parent who's sending their 4th child to middle school, right? They're old hats at it, they got it, they're good, but a new parent coming into the middle level for the first time needs more information, a steadier hand, so to speak. So we really look at that for parents as well. And then we're looking at what do teachers need? What do sending teachers need to feel good about that their students will be well served? And what do receiving teachers need in terms of information about students to be able to hit the ground running on day 1? So when we think about transitions, we're looking at those 3 groups of stakeholders, and we're looking at the whole tiered approach in terms of the need for transition activities and what those activities might be. And then now, right now, we're doing some assessment of how did we do last year. So we're getting information out, we're asking folks, how was your transition? Students now are kind of getting into the groove of the year. A month has gone by. We want to ask, how is that transition? How are they feeling? What kinds of information are we getting from our 6th grade counselors, for example, or from our, our special education teachers? How did the IEPs translate well? Did there need to be adjustments or amendments as a result? So we're gathering information now about how the transition worked for the kids as we looked at last year's transition, and we do that every year to try to improve the process each time.
I would like to add to, above and what Ms. Leonardi just said, I really think we need to commend the schools, because whenever we get a call here from a parent about a child who has really a lot of anxiety about switching schools or starting a new school, all it takes is a phone call to the receiving school, and the schools really do bend over backwards to make sure. They'll call the parent, have them come in over the summer, take the student around the school if it's just the size of the school. They really are happy to work with individual students as well, who have a lot more anxiety than the normal students. So,
Who's next? Mrs. Maxon Kennelly, followed by Mrs. Lou McCormick.
And I know it's my second time speaking, so I'll just ask my follow-up and hold on my other questions. I had 2 questions on that same number, and again, thank you for the answers that I already got. 2 questions. First, one of the changes I've been hearing, and I don't know if this is at all the elementary schools, and so that's why I'm asking, that idea of having the 5th grade teachers and having the students not have the fixed teacher that they had K through 4, and the idea that their movement, is this something that's now standard across all schools, or is that at some and not at others? And again, I know oftentimes the success of that depends on the staff that you have, that it has to work with whom you have, so that's why I ask.
It is not in place at all schools. It's in place. It's been in place at some schools for a while. So a couple of schools have adopted it this year. We're not in a position to say we're going to put it in all schools. Quite honestly, I think to the point you just raised, you need a systemic approach to make that system work at all locations all the time, and it can't just follow the particular content skills or interests of a teacher, and then that teacher leaves, and then you've got to change the model. The model shouldn't follow the teacher. The model should be the model for all places. So it's something we're looking at, but in a larger context, it fits into the picture of how we're addressing instructional minutes across the elementary schools. How do we address the areas of specialists, and as you are well aware, the band and orchestra and all those other pieces that we're trying to fit in. So we're working towards a solution towards this, but we're not there yet.
So to what degree is this a means of addressing the transition, and how is it an entirely separate issue then of addressing the scheduling? I hadn't thought of that.
Yeah, as a transition, it works well for students in the sense that there's a responsibility factor similar to a sixth grade teaming. You have to take your books and go, and you don't necessarily go back to your room and just. You have to kind of learn to be a little bit more independent and learn to work with different teacher personalities and all that type of thing. So there is some benefit to it that way. Ideally, what it would allow you to do from a curriculum and professional learning perspective is to say, if we were to say that we had 32 fifth grade teachers across the district, all of whom were teaching math, and we were to make it only 11, one per school, we could do a lot more perhaps with professional learning. We could really focus our efforts. But math has a different instructional minutes component than social studies and science do. So these are, there's an algorithm to this that has to be worked out as well.
Right. Because that's another area of interest of mine. But will there be some, and I still haven't gotten to my second question, will there be some measuring or, again, I'm not looking for, a ton of data points, but making sure that it's achieving what we wanted, yet still supporting, they are still just fifth graders, and making sure that this model, while maybe getting them ready for the movement, the not having the one teacher that they develop the rapport and the connection with is, I assume that's being factored into this, but I still want to ask.
Yes, that question now comes up as we say in certain buildings who've only had one math teacher. How does that math performance look to other buildings? Is it making a significant impact or is it not? And if it's not, then why are we doing it? That's the questions that start to be raised.
Okay. And then my second question had been that on that same page for everyone else on the board, on page 3, number 5, in the third paragraph, we will also involve the middle and high schools in a focused discussion around grading, which was very intriguing and
That
vague.
one, yes. So we have been having a lot of conversations at our leadership meetings, particularly at the high school level and somewhat at the middle school level. As you know, the elementary schools are doing standards-based grading. So we've started reading books together about and articles about grading practices, what should be considered in a grade. We have not shared this. We've shared some of what we've been doing with the teachers, but we are not entering a big movement. We're in the studying stage at this point. As you know, we have academic expectations rubrics, which are a standards-based measure for performance-based assessments, which we're developing. And so those standards are in the areas of communication and collaboration and critical and creative thinking. And we're saying that if we have a capstone experience for a student in 11th or 12th grade in the high school, they would have to meet a certain expectation of performance on those standards to be able to graduate, in addition to earning credits, which has really started us thinking about, we've talked about how to score those. Is it feedback? Is it formative? It's really formative feedback until the final summative capstone. And that's really what started our thinking about how often are we actually giving kids formative feedback compared to summative assessments. What really goes into a grade? Is it all really about how well the student has learned, or do we infuse some behavioral data into the grade? So it's really started a large dialogue. We did a lot of reading at the high school joint leadership level with all the building administrators last year. We've started, and we're meeting tomorrow, and we'll be starting to read Learning Personalized, which is by Alison Zmuda and 2 other authors, Diane Ullman, who was for a brief period the Commissioner of Education, and the head of teaching and learning, I believe. She was never the commissioner, right? Okay. in the state of Connecticut. And it's really the same idea, how to transform what happens in the classroom to ensure that students are directing their own learning to some extent and performing at a high level, making critical and creative decisions, communicating and collaborating while they do it. So that's our next level of reading. We had discussed last year that if, so several of us on the administrative team have been to CAPS, Connecticut Association of Public School Superintendents, a strong organization in Connecticut. They have an assistant, it's not called Assistant Superintendent's Roundtable anymore, but Executive District, I don't know what it's called. But it's for non-superintendents who are in central office to share ideas about education. And Allison Zmuda was a presenter there all last year, pretty much, sharing ideas. And we thought it was very much her thinking and her book, actually, are very much in line with many of the discussions. So we're going to read it, and if we decide this is something we think really helps bring all of our ideas in a more coherent way in the district, maybe we would bring her in and have her talk with our teachers and do some professional development with the teachers. And that we already have money built into the current budget to do that, but we haven't yet made that decision because we're just embarking on the reading now.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Mrs. Lou McCormick.
I wanted to go back to question 5 because just to add on that discussion regarding the transition from 5 to 6 and 8 to 9. I think you gave a lot of color around some of the general comments that you made within here, but I was hoping to see more specificity around like specific strategies that we had implemented as part of the program. Like, I think a couple of the thoughts that I had discussed earlier was the idea of all of a sudden when they hit middle school or even high school, the frequency and the rigor of the tests and the form of the tests suddenly changes. It's like almost like overnight, like a switch flips on. And I'm wondering if there is a way within our program to introduce it a little more gradually within elementary school, meaning that you build up to a level of expecting a unit test every so often or expect a quiz every week. And I think depending on the school, certain teachers might do it and some might not, but it's not kind of a deliberate program that's rolled out across the district is my guess. So something like that just would ease the kids into all of a sudden every single grade is on Infinite Campus, and it's like overwhelming, like everything counts, 0, 100%, And I think that's kind of a shocker, and for parents as well, who are not used to having tests, and all of a sudden there's this huge level of stress that comes up because you see these grades and you can't get rid of them, and I didn't know that that's how it was going to be done. So that's one thing that I think might be good as a transition, have it more gradual from grades 3 through 5. Slowly introduce the concept of a test, The other thing that I think is really important, and I'm not sure if this is transition, but I do believe it's part of it, is the concept of note-taking. Note-taking is like this skill. It's like this unsaid skill that we in the ages past, before technology's around, we had to take notes. Now we don't have to because it's so fast to just print it out and, it's faster to disseminate information. But I think there might be something lost in that process. There's been some studies around that. And if you think about it, I was talking with Dr. Tracy about this when we were studying, for tests and such, you take an exam by consolidating the information into 4 pages. And then when you get close to the exam, you're consolidating it down to 2 pages. And then when you really know that stuff cold, you can put it all on 1 page in your tiny handwriting with the pictures and everything. And once you've done that, you've kind of mastered it. And I feel like we've kind of lost that now, because I remember with some kids that I know, they took notes, but not really. And when it was time for the test, they kind of chucked those handwritten notes and pulled out that printed sheet that they got in classroom, that review page, and they just studied that. And I think as you get older in life, when it's not handed out to you so neatly as to what you need to know, I think it'll eventually, you've lost a skill and you can get lost in the process because you haven't been taught over time to, within your own mind, organize that information and refine it. So I'm wondering if there's a way that we can like build that into the transition process, like how you are taught to outline. I don't know if there's a deliberate area in the program.
So I would say that, so what we use for our teacher evaluation system is Marzano's and Marzano's framework, and some of Marzano's most effective teaching strategies are that students need to learn how to be effective note takers, they need to learn to prioritize information, and they need to be able to summarize information. So we should be working on those skills with students. So, and we are using Marzano's framework with teachers to give them feedback. So that may be an area we need to focus on. And I saw that in your question. So we will certainly, I think there's enough administrators here to know that that may be an area we need to look at.
It's a bizarre little thing, but I think over your lifetime, you realize how valuable good note-taking, and with that, handwriting. We've kind of been poo-pooing handwriting, and I can debate this with many people as to whether we should just let go of handwriting altogether because everyone's typing. But I think that there is something to be said by practicing the formation of the hand and having those words flow, because sometimes you'll notice when you write differently than how you speak. And it's almost like your hand has its own mind after a while because it knows how to write. And I feel like when you type, it's not exactly the same. It's just a little bit different, not quite as personal, and doesn't teach you spelling and recognition of meaning the same way that as when you write with your hand. It's hard to explain, but I think when we move too quickly and we don't let the kids go through that process long enough, and I feel like even cursive handwriting, it allows kids to realize the break within words and the tie within them, as opposed to streaming. It's just different. And so I would also, as you guys consider this program, reconsider that concept around the handwriting and the importance in elementary school and the handwriting and the note-taking. Because again, kids don't get to watch teachers model writing the way they used to. Teachers used to stand at that chalkboard and write those notes, and they would watch them form. They don't get to see that anymore. Everything is like, press a button, there it goes. So that whole formation, I feel like it would be nice to have that in elementary school still, before we cut it out completely into technology. Let technology occur, but it's such a fast move into technology that I feel like we're cutting out some really important formative steps in advance. So I'll leave that with you on that point. And the other point I wanted to make along those lines is the introduction of Latin roots, prefixes and suffixes, and the deliberate rollout of that within elementary school.
What number are you on now?
This is all within the transition.
All on number 5.
This is all transitional in the fact that this helps develop vocabulary, this helps develop writing skills, and the gradual rollout of it over time. And this transition, I think, is really important from, there's a big one that occurs between elementary to middle that's required, and that doesn't occur in 1 year. It occurs kind of as a rollout with maybe an expectations assessment by 5th grade. And the same thing from 8th to 9th, because by then you have to be able to write essays, big essays using good words, and if you want to do well in the SATs and all these other things, you have to be able to have a grasp of these parts so that you can piece together new words and such. And so I'm just wondering how we fit that. I know in some private schools they require Latin. I don't think we need to do that. I think there's other ways. Like we've had teachers who actually give their vocabulary lists based on Latin roots with different variations of that. So anyways, I think that would be nice to be something we would roll out programmatically across the district. Just thoughts for you. Thanks.
I just wanted to respond to that part. We do now, with the introduction of the word work this year and vocabulary building, as well as the onset of social studies and science curriculum, we are amping up the explicit teaching of vocabulary and the morphology of words by their roots, prefixes, suffixes. So you'll be seeing more of that.
Oh, so that's fabulous. That's really great. So are you going to be like providing with, is there like an actual program, like description for this transition 5 to 6, 8 to 9, that you're actually putting together like a packet of the actual initiatives you're doing that we're going to be getting at some point? Or is this just a broad concept that we're never really going to tangibly lay out in pieces?
I don't know that we'll have a package for you, so to speak, but certainly think we can report back to you. I mean, it's sort of a work in progress. For example, one of the things you mentioned was about the shift in assessment and expectation, I think, from 5th to 6th grade and 8th to 9th grade, and we know that's happening. So we're trying to figure out exactly what we need to focus on. One of the things that I mentioned previously, the instructional rounds that are occurring tomorrow, I think for 5th grade teachers and 6th grade teachers to really appreciate the difference in expectation from 5th to 6th grade is for 6th grade teachers to see what 5th grade teachers are doing and vice versa. And that's part of the goal of instructional rounds, so that we can then take some concrete things and work with staff on those things. But it's sort of like a constant discovery. We're looking closely at students who were getting reading support in 8th grade, and are they still getting reading support in 9th grade? Should they still be getting reading support in 9th grade? So we're trying to look across the schools and see what it is that we are missing or not doing enough of, or that we need to change. And as it's not just one thing, it's a lot of different things. Microphone? Sorry.
And can I ask you, do you think that disconnect is a building problem because you're moving from a building to another building, or do you think it's because of the way our incentive and communication is organized?
I think it's probably a combination of a lot of things. I'm sure there's psychologically, I think, a change from elementary school to middle school and middle school to high school. So, and some of that is driven by the building and the way we set up the schedules and the way we move kids around through their learning, and they have different, there's so many aspects. And then even within the classroom, we need to look at what is different about what's happening in those classrooms. So it's very complicated, but I think we're trying to, I mean, we're starting to really look at it and try to figure out what it is that we can do to make it easier for students.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Other questions from board members? Let me see if there's anybody else other than, so Ms. Carnell, followed by Mrs. Maxon Connolly.
No, your hand's up first. Okay.
Well, but she's already spoken twice, and generally you should allow other board members to speak up.
We're all on the same team. I guess I'm just a little confused in page 2, number 3, and then we go to page 3, number 6. And, excuse me, I guess what I'm referring to is the science. I'll let you read, or you know what I'm talking about.
I think so.
My favorite subject. I guess, where do we stand? I know we talked about earth science, I believe, last year, and then it's saying that we're going to need an extra year, if I'm following this correctly, due to the change in the Connecticut State Department of Education. I guess my question is, do we have to go with their timeline, or can we make our own decision and get this curriculum to what it should be?
So we are, the teachers have all been working on the rewriting the science curriculum. Dr. Boyce may want to follow up. And so we are looking to have it adopted and come to you in the spring, and so it would be implemented next year, and it's based on the next generation science standards. The state has been kind of saying there's no rush to do this, kind of slow it down, and the reason they're saying that, I believe, is because they really have not developed the new assessment based on the next generation science standards. So they're a little bit behind, so they're telling us there's no rush. But we've heard you, and we are working on it. It will be ready in the spring, and you know, I think you'll be pleased. The whole earth science piece is still in discussion, but the next generation science standards have really put much more rigor and emphasis on earth science standards. Currently, the earth science course that we offer in 9th grade is really more environmental science, earth science. The new standards really require a much higher level of learning in earth science. There's a whole lot more geology, there's a lot more astronomy, so there's more physics, there's more chemistry. So we're thinking it might be a good idea if we teach a course that incorporates all of those standards to not necessarily give it in 9th grade, but give it at a later time.
Would you make it, what's it called?
Elective.
Thank you.
Yes.
It's been a long day.
Yes, good thinking.
We think along the same way. Would it be an elective? Is that what you think?
Yes, so the only science course that's required by the state of Connecticut in high school is biology. Every student must take biology. Other than that, really, all the other science courses, although we strongly recommend them, we think it's a good idea for students to have biology and chemistry and physics. I didn't major in earth science. There's a reason for that. Some people have a preference, some people don't. So those higher level courses, for example, physics is really an elective, chemistry is really an elective, but we still strongly encourage students to take it. Earth science would be, what we're thinking would be in that category.
Thank you. I'm just concerned that if the state is saying slow it down, that we don't.
We're not.
Thank you.
Dr. Boyce, did you have anything to add?
No, I think you also asked a question about number 6 I was going to respond to. We're developing performance-based tasks for the high school, but we saw no reason to develop tasks in science based on the old curriculum. We have them in place. So after we bring you the new curriculum, which will probably be in May, next year we'd then start writing performance-based tasks for science based on the new curriculum. So we're just in a transition for science only.
Mrs. Maxon Connelly.
Yeah, I have a follow-up on this. Sorry.
Mrs. Lou McCormick.
Thank you. When developing this new science curriculum, are we taking feedback from students? Because I want to say that since I haven't experienced the high school science, most of the information I've had has come from students, and I would think that students who are the learners would be a valuable resource to get some feedback, thoughts about what, maybe not specifically content-wise, but, some of them are pretty bright. They may have some thoughts about how content could be delivered or things that we could be improving. Are we reaching out to the student bodies that have already experienced the different grades to get their feedback on how we could improve? Because I think the students are probably one of the best resources. Maybe the parents are involved, but a lot of times by that time the kids are on their own. And a lot of them are self-motivated, particularly those who are interested in going into the sciences.
I'll start. Well, I think what you said is, I think what you're talking about is instruction, if I've heard you correctly, because the curriculum would be driven by the standards, and we don't have a lot of leeway there, although I know you have a particular interest in STEM. So next generation science standards have a whole lot more engineering standards in them. And so that will require a shift in instruction where kids are doing a bit more inquiry and critical and creative problem solving and designing and models. But remember that we're asking teachers to get feedback from students about the instruction during the year. So we may get some of that information. I don't know if there's anything in place to get students' feedback on the curriculum, but again, the standards are very comprehensive. The new standards have they're significantly more challenging than the prior standards, which were much more focused on content. These are more focused on skills and science practice skills. So I don't know how much feedback students would be able to provide, not knowing what the standards are. But certainly they could give teachers feedback on the instructional piece, which is how it's delivered.
Right. And I would say the only concern I have is, it's very difficult for a student to give criticism to their teacher. You know, their teachers are held up here. They're not going to want to do that openly. I mean, just truthfully. So if we really wanted to get good feedback, you could go through the student council. You could go through, there are different ways to solicit feedback. And I just think that sometimes when we develop the curriculum, getting a 360 perspective can be helpful. We don't really have to do everything they say. It's just a piece of information, and if you find that a lot of them are saying a particular thing, that we watch out for that in the development of the new curriculum to make sure it doesn't repeat. Or if there are particular things that were very good that we didn't realize were very good. That's also, I think, important because, you know, attracting kids into STEM and engaging them, they have to actually like it. They have to feel like they want to do it. And so how best to understand that than to actually ask them? So I would greatly encourage us to reach out more to the constituents around us to get feedback, because we all have our view, and sometimes people think we're in an ivory tower with our own views. And sometimes it's nice to reach out and just get perspective. Whether we use it or not is our decision. But
Thank you. Mrs. Maxon Connelly?
First, I had one follow-up to Mrs. Lou McCormick's point earlier. Correct me if I'm wrong, but within the recently approved English language, the ELA curriculum, we had plenty of embedded work within the curriculum on prefixes, suffixes, and Latin roots, correct? Yes. So that's already in there. We already approved that. Yes. Okay, I just wanted to check my memory. First of all, once again, thank you for all the answers to these questions. I honestly didn't think I'd get this quickly, so that helps a lot. But a few follow-ups. First, the star reading.
Again, it would be helpful if you're referencing a
unfortunately,
particular page.
Star reading in here was, well, no, it was mine. I was in the first annual update, page 27. That there was no, I know I wouldn't expect it for the math, but I did expect 2016 data for the reading, and I was wondering why that wasn't in there.
We are, we're looking to get the reading scores for grades 3 through 8 in there. We've had a question with the STAR right now as a provider on the setting of the SGPs. We've raised a concern with them about how they're calculating it. So once we've got an answer from them, we'll be able to provide you with that information.
You have to explain what that is.
Oh, I'm sorry, yes.
Actually,
yes.
no, because this is something that I hadn't realized about STAR, so I think it's a great chance, because this is something very different from anything else in this plan.
Yes, I apologize, I've been living this. The SGP is the student growth profile. So essentially what happens is it allows, in the STAR assessment for both reading and math, after 3 iterations of the test, it'll be able to just set a determinant of how much the student needs to grow to start to either stay on grade level or grow on grade level, or to make up to grade level. So, for example, the state of Connecticut, for example, when it's looking at STAR growth percentages, is setting a range anywhere from 0.35 to 0.66. So a student who is further behind grade level should achieve a 0.66, where a student who's on grade level should achieve a 0.35. What we want to be able to do is, looking at each student's individual growth target, determine, for our district profile purposes, what percentage of students do we expect to meet those targets at the end of the year. It's something it's a brand new assessment. We have to learn how to calibrate that. We also have to learn how to, in a sense, take its advice on what it says we should be doing with those students. But it also drives for us, accentuates the need that we already see to continue to work with our teachers to improve their teaching of skills and strategies in reading and in the content areas of reading, in order to meet the student needs. Whether that's a student who's at intervention level and needs to catch up to grade level, or to a student who's reading at grade level and needs to continue to improve.
Sure.
Is the SPG new within STAR? Because we've had STAR for 3 years now, correct? For reading, because we had iReady, which we have seemed to have deleted from here. But STAR we've had for several years.
I'm not aware. I'm only aware at the elementary level, I apologize for that, we've used STAR the last 2 years since I've been here.
Yeah, we started to use STAR at the middle school, but only for a selected population of students. And that was about 3 years ago, I believe. And that was only used for that purpose until we expanded it grades 3 through 8.
But is SPG new? SGP, right? Sorry. Is that new?
We were not aware of it, but what has happened is we've done an intensive group of meetings with the STAR people, and we're also working very closely with people from Greenwich who are also using it, and together we have really dived into this, and Mr. Cummings and his staff more than I. But this is something we became more and more aware of as we studied it, I believe, over the summer and into the school year, and it was an important revelation to us. We were not aware of this when we were using it just in the middle school with a small group of students.
But we've had it now for 2 years in the elementary.
We've just begun the second year in the
Begun
elementary.
the second year. So why don't we have last year as a base year?
Because we have a concern right now with the way STAR is calculating. We don't think they're calculating it right. So we are working with them to make sure that it's calculated right before we publish it. But as soon as we have it, we'll be able to bring it to you.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. And again, just an exciting idea of laying out that notion that even the high achievers, if they're stagnating, that's something that gets revealed by this. So it truly is seeking the whole idea of the growth of every student at every level. That's what was very exciting about this.
Well, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I think to your point, it both identifies the needs of individual students, but it becomes more meaningful work for every individual teacher because it's about the kids in front of them, not the mass.
And having just been presented that mass of data, I can tell you how meaningless it is without the professional development that I hope you are providing the teachers, because otherwise it's shrug.
Yes, please keep that need for professional development in mind over the ensuing
Absolutely.
months.
Absolutely. Especially for something, I mean, reading.
you.
Absolutely.
Mrs. Maxington, if I could just interrupt, we've been at it about an hour. We still want to talk about the recommended changes, so if I could help the board move along, I think that would be helpful. Continue.
Okay. I had one question. This was on from page 14, number 5. And my question had been regarding the commentary on why, because again, another data point I thought was very exciting, getting the non-traditional students. Does it make sense to include raw scores for those non-traditional students? And I ask that because, to me, looking at the numbers, my immediate thought was, because the baseline number went up, that was probably the attraction of greater traditional students. And so it's not that there are fewer non-traditional students enrolling in the courses, it's simply the ratio to the traditional students.
So I'll try to answer based on my understanding of your question.
Yeah.
So think of it the same way we measure AP. We're doing competing, we're
Right.
using competing data.
Right.
We're trying to get more and more students to take AP classes, all the while knowing that the students that we're encouraging to take more AP classes may be experiencing an AP class for the first time. They may not have the necessary persistence and study skills, but we still want them to experience that so they can learn those skills and get a better idea of what their expectations will be in college. So by encouraging more students to take it and by trying to get more students in the higher score range, we're competing.
Right.
But it's what we need to do. We know that every child really should have the experience of an AP class if they want to. They need to learn what a college course feels like, what the expectations are. But we're not going to say we're going to be exclusive so we can get those high scores. So yes, there's some of this data is competing. It's the same with career and tech ed. We're trying to get more and more students taking career and tech ed courses. But the second data point that we're looking at is the state has actually identified some new or older high-skilled careers that are very underrepresented by gender. And so one of the things we want to do as well is try to get more girls in courses that would traditionally be taken by boys and vice versa. So yes, they're somewhat competing, but that's okay. We'll just continue to push forward and recognize that and hope that you all recognize that as well.
Okay. I was wondering, and I assume that we're waiting for year 2 of this, because on some of the data points, we've already achieved the 2020 and granted, there could always be a slide, but on several data points, we have already achieved the 2020 target or exceeded. So I just wanted to clarify that the idea is we're going to wait for year 2, see if that trend continues, and then adjust as opposed to doing it prematurely.
Yes, we would hope you would allow us to do that, yes. Because you can see that some things went down, others went up and exceeded the target, and as I said, as we said many times in this report, 1 year of data does not actually give us a trend.
Right.
We need to see the trend.
2 questions left. My next one is, I was wondering why or how outplaced students get included in the attendance data?
That would be a great question for the State Department of Education.
Okay. So I just shouldn't go there. Okay.
Well, no, that's
Since I don't think we have any representatives here.
that's the rule. That is their rule, and that's the way it works. So,
Students who are outplaced by our PPT process, so students who the PPT determines need to be educated, they're still our students. So they're still on the rolls of our district. Therefore, their attendance at those outplacements is part of our overall district attendance data.
you should note that the same is true for the district graduation rates. So we own the students, and even though they may be at a different location, and we have little control maybe over attendance and graduation, those are still our students, and so the state still calculates that in the data. So you would see, for example, on graduation rate, that our district average is lower than the graduation rate for each of our high schools.
Okay.
So the short answer is because the state said so.
Gotcha.
Yes, yes.
And then my last one, and that is to page 12, the postgraduate survey. If for some reason the movement came across us that we had to dispense with or severely cut down this entire district improvement plan, this was the one area where I would fight. I think the postgraduate survey, in many ways, is one of the most important points in this whole district improvement plan, because ultimately, did we serve our students? You know, whether it's career, whether it's community college, you know, a tech pursuit, four-year college, et cetera. And so, thank you so much for providing the survey, because when I saw the only percentage that was included in the update, I was disheartened would be an understatement. But I also ultimately don't find that, you know, was prepared, was not prepared, is just not meaningful. It really isn't. It would give staff no direction or anything else. So a few things. To what degree is the data from that survey being disseminated to curriculum leaders, to building leaders? I mean, since I don't know what those numbers look like, which is what I would be keenly interested to see, of what value was it? Because I thought going in, this was going to be one of the most valuable things that this district improvement plan produced.
I'm sure one of the headmasters would be happy to speak to that.
Well done, Mr. Ebling.
I think Mr. Ebeling is playing this. The senior headmaster shall go first.
I think Mr. Coyne has schooled him well.
Thank you. Greg Hatzis, headmaster, Fairfield Ludlow High School. Ms. Maxon-Kennelly, last year was the first year we received data from the post-high school survey. It was administered to, I'm sure it reads here, that the class of 2014, 1 year after they had graduated, so in the summer of 2015. So we had sort of, if you would, our baseline data there. There is a ton of information there. When the district improvement plan was developed, we had yet administered what that survey was going to be. So we had a generic placeholder of just trying to find out how satisfied were our customers, so to speak. So then, after getting the results of the data, we shared that with our staff. We actually shared it with the district data team as well to look at some of the results of that. And then just this past September, a couple of weeks ago, we received the second round of data. So we're still plowing through a lot of that. There's, like as you imagined, a ton of information there that is very helpful. The one downside I would say is that our response rates were not great. So we have to balance the information that's there with wondering how reliable it might be.
And as a follow-up, both question and suggestion, at some point, and I don't know if this is to Mr. Hatzis or to the chair, I would be interested just in some general feedback, not school comparison, but general feedback of how has that resulted in change. I don't know if it's too premature to ask now with only 2 iterations and with what I recognize as a low response rate. But I think that would be something, I'd like to know that we got something for that and that it's, formed a direction, I would assume in multiple areas. But I would be very interested in that feedback. Not that you're prepared to give that at the moment and I'm not asking for it now, but I would be interested in that.
Okay.
And then I had a suggestion, but I don't know if you want to go ahead and ask a question.
So this is on that topic, and Mr. Llewellyn, you had a
move on. So if
question
you've
too.
got a follow-up.
Mrs. Gerber.
Yeah, just to follow up on that, and forgive me if we covered this, how do the graduates get the survey? How do we reach out to them?
We hired an outside company, Futuristics Incorporated, and we provided them with the email, the addresses of all of the graduates, assuming that only 1 year after graduating high school, they may not have strayed too far. So that was the home addresses, and so they were mailed paper surveys to all of the graduates. So it would be up to them to then return those surveys back to the place where, to the company that collected the data.
So I guess to follow up on that then, is there some way that, I don't know if maybe the company would have suggestions, some way to do it electronically or to have the option electronically, like send them the notice and they could go online to do it or have the option to do it? Just because I think trying to get anyone to mail something by snail mail is increasingly difficult.
We explored it with this particular company, and they, at this stage of the game, have not progressed to that level where they could provide it electronically. So it's something that we could look at and consider. But it's one of those things that when we first tried to look at some of the companies, we tried to pick one that was the most fiscally prudent for the district, and also give us the most comprehensive report that we could get. So, to be honest with you, there weren't many good surveys out there. We requested from several folks, and they either could not get it together in time for us to administer the survey in a timely way, or their product was really poor. So we had limited options. We chose what we thought was the best one. And now we're in a place where if we were to change horses, we won't really see that longitudinal data that we're looking for.
Okay, thanks.
And then my final point on that is, maybe one thing that would help is if we could do a big push in, prior to seniors going on internship or in May and June, letting them know that it would be coming a year down the road. I mean, I'd love to set up a whole class agent process and get them really on each other. It's just, to me, it's just really important that we find this out. I think my perception is it would be very helpful. So, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Llewellyn?
Sure.
Can I have this be the last question?
Can I ask one question on that one first?
Go ahead. On the topic that we were just on?
Yeah, the one we were just on.
Mrs. Lou McCormick.
So is it possible that you could come back with just a quick blurb or summary of what the key takeaway was from this last survey that you guys kind of got from that feedback? Because I think that would be interesting just to hear.
I will defer to the chair and the superintendent, but we would be more than happy to share whatever data you request.
I mean, you don't have to give us the whole thing, but if there were like 2 or 3 key takeaways, I think that would be great.
And so you just got the second results, so I assume you have a school to run and may not be able to get to it tomorrow. So we'll work with Dr. Tracy in finding out when you can fit that into your schedule to compile something.
Will do.
Sure. Mr. Llewellyn.
Okay. Question for you as it relates to number 3 on page 13. And I know we've asked several times in the past to kind of define what is our sample size for free and reduced, but when I look at the AP scores, and I look at the decline from 68% to 46% in the free and reduced, getting 4 and above, and the decline of about 10 points in the 3 and above. Is that sample size a dozen? Is it hundreds? Because I think that's going to tell us whether or not we need to be concerned with a success rate dropping by 50%.
I can tell you it's not hundreds. I can't tell you the exact number. Do you guys have any idea of the number of students that took AP that were free and reduced at each school? Yeah, we could go back and find that for you, but significantly smaller, obviously, than the all-student category. So a few students probably count for several percentage
But it would be
points.
good to know, because we've asked in the past, I mean, we're always talking about this category
You want
that we need to
numbers?
target, but it'd be good to know how many there are in that category.
Yeah, we can give you total
Perfect.
numbers for each.
That'd be great. By great, it'd be awesome. Okay, if we move on to page 16, and we take a look at number 11, and I guess this is an indicator that relates back to accelerated mathematics. And my first question is, intro to calculus, is there a calculus class? Or is it just intro to calculus and then AP calculus? Because intro is not bold, so is there a calculus as well?
I have to tell you, I didn't hear the question because
Number
Mr.
11.
Edling was providing
No
me
problem.
with the data
You
you
have
asked
N?
for.
Go ahead.
Yes.
Sample size.
So in 13-14, the number of students who successfully completed AP were 397 at Ludlow and 197 at Ward. And for comparison, the free and reduced numbers were 21 at Ludlow and 17 at Ward. So they're small numbers in comparison. And then in 2000, those were for participation.
Participation, okay.
Yeah.
So
And then
600-ish.
at, in 14-15, we
Okay.
had, the numbers went up to, at Ludlow, 412 students successfully completed. At Ward, 218.
Okay.
Oh, wait a minute, sorry. The 412 was combined. 218 was Ludlow, 194 was Ward. And there were only 14 free and reduced lunch students across both schools, 3 from Ludlow and 11 from Ward. So that first set of data I gave you, it was 397 were all students.
Total, I was gonna say,
Both
okay.
high schools, and there was 200 and 197.
20,
200 at Ludlow,
200.
197 at Ward. 21 total free and reduced.
21 total.
4 at Ludlow, and 17 at Ward. So you can see the numbers are relatively small, so they move.
And I guess that
Carry
just...
a lot of percentage points.
Yeah, and I guess that warrants the question as to whether or not it even belongs here if you're looking at a sample size of 20 kids. Whether, I mean, yes, it's a very important thing to focus on, but I'm not sure 20 out of 10,000 warrants the number of times we see everything on here. Just a thought. If we look at number 11, please, on page 16.
Go 11 on page 16. Sorry. Yep.
So we're looking at baseline data of 13% completing intro to calculus, AP calculus, and multivariable. And one of my concerns about this is, yes, we have a 3% increase, roughly, but if you take a look at the results in the AP, there's a big decline in the success rate on the AP scores. If you look at the number of 4s and 5s in Calc AB. Go back to 14, they went from 82% to 46% in 16, and around 61, for Calculus BC, they went from around 61% in 14 to around 47% in 16. So how does that, I mean, there's been a steady march kind of down in those grades. So is that actually benefiting folks to put more into some classes?
One thing that we've learned about students enrolled in AP classes is not all of them take the AP test. And so that's important to remember, because students take the AP test or don't take it for a variety of reasons. If a senior already knows that he or she is going to a university that won't provide credit for the AP test, they're not going to spend the money to take the test. So, you know, many of our students might be going to very prestigious schools and do quite well on the test, but they don't take it for that reason. So it's something we have to look at very carefully, and keep in mind that the students taking the AP courses are benefiting from taking a course that is a college-level course. Not all of them are represented in the results from the test.
And what I've heard, having 2 kids in high school, what I've heard from kids in high school is that the courses have slowed down somewhat, so it's making it more difficult for kids who want to take that test to score as well, because they're not moving at the same pace. And the results, if you actually look at the percentiles in 1, 2, and then 4 and 5, they actually reflect what students are saying. Because we have students scoring 1 or 2 going from 3.6% in 14 to 27% in 16. Now, once again, that's a sample size that's relatively small, but the trends on the 1s and 2s mirror the trends on the 3 and 4s. So kids may or may not take the test, but I'm not sure that's changing necessarily year to year. I just have a concern because some kids do want to take this 4 credit, and you know, you need to get a 4 or a 5 in order to receive credit at many schools. I just wonder if there's something else we can do to help encourage the AP course for folks, yet not have an adverse impact on the individual test takers.
Well, you know, as you know, the teachers who teach AP have to submit a syllabus to the College Board, so they are required to follow the course that the College Board has described. I also believe that your reference to the 1 and 2s were probably the reason we made the AP honor roll for 4 years, because we are getting more and more students into AP courses. And frankly, a student who's never taken an AP course before, who takes it and gets even a 1 or a 2 on the test, is far ahead, in my opinion, than not having taken it at all. And so I think part of that is a reflection of the fact that we've opened the doors to AP for students, and teachers are working very hard to support them to do as well as they possibly can at a very rigorous level. I just think we have to be cautious in looking at some of these score results, knowing that not all of our students are taking the test.
Okay, so that's actually going to bring me back to a topic from a while back, which is the new person who we're going to be looking to put into the budget. Our last name starts with a Z. What's her name? Zamuda? I didn't really understand your answer. Are we in the middle school and high school going to be doing away with grade levels? Is that what she's advocating for? Or is she advocating for adding percentages for participation? I wasn't sure I understood kind of your answer.
So we're not, we're just, as we're acting as students at the administrative level. We're reading about practices that are more focused on having grades reflect a student's learning as opposed to other factors such as behavior, attendance, whatever, participation. We aren't changing anything yet. We're not advocating necessarily to change anything yet. We're reading about it and learning about it. The elementary schools have already gone to standards-based grading. So that's really what we're looking at. We're not making a decision to do anything. We're really just exploring as administrators into what we believe is a best practice. Allison Zmuda is not someone who is going to be on our payroll. She is someone that we may look to come and provide professional development, that's all, like a consultant, maybe once, maybe twice, if we even decide to go in that direction. But we're not talking about any large-scale change. We're talking about, for example, we're talking about the value of homework. Are we really getting the bang for the buck out of homework? Is homework graded? Should it be graded? Is it really about helping a student learn, or is it really about giving a student a grade? There's a whole lot of questions that we're exploring and trying to answer, and then we'll eventually, in probably most cases, be asking teachers to ask the same kinds of questions that we're asking. We would never make a change of that magnitude without involving the teachers. We're just exploring at the administrative level at this point.
Okay. And then to follow up on
And
number
is this your last question? We've got almost an hour and a half into this, and so I want to kind of make sure we wrap it up.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sure. So if we look at number 16 in the CMTs, I have the same question as it relates to the CAP 10 that I had for the APs. We see that the percent advanced dropped by 5%, but the free and reduced dropped significantly more. What do we know our sample size?
I can get you that data if you
I
want
mean,
it.
I
It's
think-
small. It's very
I think when we
small.
go forward, we should probably be putting that on here so we can measure whether or not it's meaningful in terms of,
Well-
is it a it's obviously important to those kids, but is it a crisis for the district the way we need to move
Yeah,
mountains, or do we need to work with a dozen kids?
I would just suggest that rather than putting it on here, we do give a CMT capped update report. We give an update report to the board on all the assessments. So probably it would be important for us to include numbers on that information.
Okay,
So we'll make sure
that'd
we
be fine.
do that.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Let me refer the board to the last page, page 31. This does not require action at this time, but I'll ask Dr. Tracy just to kind of highlight the two changes at the moment. In our discussion with our superintendent-elect, we've indicated to her that we expect her to take a look at this, and if she has any recommendations for changes before we make any real changes after the second year, she would be welcome to. And so she's seen this report, but has not had a chance to weigh in on these particular suggestions or whether she'll have any of her own. But Dr. Tracy.
No, that's correct. Dr. Jones has a copy of this. We've started to talk about it. I don't think there's a sense of urgency about these two changes, that it couldn't wait for December for her to get here and have her opinion. That your plan from 2015 does say that any modifications require the board's affirmance. That's not a word I get to use a lot, but so at some point, if Dr. Jones and the staff here believes that these or other changes are in order, I'm sure she would come back to you, but there's no need to deal with it now.
Any questions on these two recommended changes?
No.
No. Okay, so despite Mr. Llewellyn's last question, you want to take one last question? It's going to be a short one, though, right?
Yeah, and this is more of a comment regarding, after having looked at all these numbers, because we had so many, and it was a lot of information, and a lot of it was, very useful, but after looking at it, some of it, after thinking about it, maybe I'm wondering how useful you think it is actually to include. Like, is there a way to shorten this so it's a little more pithy? So I just wanted to draw our attention to the, I don't know how many pages, is it 1, 2, 3, 4 pages of district common assessments, and whether those numbers actually belong in a 5-year district improvement plan, or if they are more year-to-year progress information for us, because at the end of the day, given these are district common assessments that we make, if we wanted it to be 95%, gosh, we could change that common assessment and make it 95%. And if we wanted to make it harder because we wanted to match the SBA, We can make that test harder. So I'm not quite sure what it tells us, because then each year to year, if we actually are trying to tweak the common assessment, then it's different. And then the baseline is not relevant from year to year because we are tweaking it. And theoretically, we should be tweaking it. So I'm wondering if this is the right place to put all this information, or if this is stuff you might report to us quarterly, or whatever, once a year, twice a year.
Can I take a stab at that for a second?
Yeah, that's a comment for the staff to take under consideration relative to the frequency in reviewing this data and how best to report it out. Okay. So, we're on to item 5A, and I think that's the chair of the policy committee. Shall I keep talking till you get that? And in my interest in moving things along, please let me add my thanks for this fine report and the work you've done this past year.
You're welcome.
Thank you all.
These are documents that were given out last meeting, and they're on the agenda for action tonight. Have I stretched out my introduction long enough?
I have 3 meetings worth of papers here. Sorry.
She wants to know if you want her copy. Yes.
Yes, please.
Go ahead.
Thank you.
So let me put the recommended motion on the table for 5A, that the Board of Education adopt policy 4152.6/4252.6. Do I have a motion? Mrs. Maxon Kennelly, Ms. Carnell, a member of the policy committee, seconds it. Do you have any comments that you wish to make, Mrs. Maxon Kennelly?
I don't, only in that I received no questions from the board, so I don't, if it's clear for everybody, I did finally find my copy, then I'm ready to act unless there are questions from the board.
Any questions from the board? Seeing none, this is an action item, so any member of the public that wishes to comment on the policy, personnel leaves, Family and Medical Leave Act, please come forward, state your name and address. Seeing nobody coming forward, back to the board. The motion on the table is that the Board of Education adopt policy 4152.6/4252.6. All in favor, please raise your hand. It is unanimous with 8 people here. Thank you very much. Item 5B is the deletion. The recommended motion is that the Board of Education approve the deletion of policy 4935. Do I have a motion, Mrs. Maxon Kennelly? And Mrs. Gerber seconds it. Any questions any comments that you wish to make on this?
No, obviously everyone could see how it went from 3 paragraphs to 3 pages, so rather significant meaty change, and now we need to get rid of the old one.
Thank you. Any questions from the board? This is a voting item, so any member of the public wish to comment on the deletion of this policy that the one that we just passed replaces? Seeing nobody come forward, back to the board, that the motion on the table is that the Board of Education approve the deletion of policy 4935. All in favor, please raise your hand. It is unanimous, 8-0. Thank you very much. Item 6A, thank you for patience. To Mr. Thompson, who has been waiting, please come on up to the table. This is regarding the charging stations at Fairfield Ward High School and Fairfield Ludlow High School. Let me put the motion on the table that the Board of Education approve the installation of 2 EV charging stations at Fairfield Ward High School and 2 EV charging stations at Fairfield Ludlow High School, 4 units total, which will be paid for by a grant from the Connecticut DEEP. Do I have a motion? Mr. Calabrese, do I have a second? Mr. Dwyer? Shall we defer to any presentation that Mr. Thompson wishes to make, and then we'll go back to the board for any discussion? Mr. Thompson. And again, introduce yourself for the TV audience.
Yes, thank you, Board. I'm Scott Thompson. I'm a volunteer with the town's Clean Energy Task Force. And what the Clean Energy Task Force does, we're appointed by the Board of Selectmen, and we promote clean energy within the Fairfield community. We have 3 focus areas: renewable energy, specifically solar power, sustainable transportation, and we focus on electric vehicles for that, and then energy efficiency, and we do a lot with energy efficiency audit promotion in the community. The project that we're proposing here, we applied for and received a Connecticut Department of Energy and Environmental Protection grant earlier this year. It's actually 2 grants, $10,000 for each of the 2 high schools. And we have gone to vendors and through the town procurement process, and they have gotten bids. And we have been able to secure bids that would be able to install 2 electric vehicle chargers at each school for equal to or less than the reimbursable grant. So we're coming before this board and then eventually the Board of Finance and the RTM to ask for the approval to expend town funds and then be 100% reimbursed for the installation of the EVs. Also, we were given some questions when we went in front of the Board of Finance about the electricity cost associated with the EV chargers. And we had been the beneficiary of some data from a United Illuminating study for some other electric vehicle charging stations in town. There's currently 13 in town. And we're working on these 4 for the high schools, along with a few others, as part of a comprehensive town plan to put in this infrastructure. So we used that data from the United Illuminating study to come up with kind of a worst-case estimate, which is what was put in your packet. We estimated $600 per year for electricity. I say that's worst case because as of right now, we only know that there are teachers and some students interested in getting electric cars. We don't know for a fact that anyone actually has one to plug in just yet, but that is kind of one of the key things here. If you build it, they will come. So with that, so that kind of addresses, I guess, the electricity cost. And to try to put it in context, the charging stations use the equivalent power of about a dryer, not a hair dryer, a clothes dryer. So clothes dryer uses about 5 kilowatt hours per hour, and the EV chargers use about 6. So think of it as, you know, someone doing a load of laundry in the context of the energy usage here. The Clean Energy Task Force was also involved in bringing the town Department of Public Works together with the school system. Sal Morabito and Tom Cullen, we worked together and have been successful at getting several solar projects approved in the school system. And so in particular at Ward and Ludlow, those systems were installed earlier this year and went live, and will be saving the town, the Board of Education, $90,000 on average per year. So to put that in reference, in context, those 2 schools use each about $425,000 to $450,000 of electricity a year. So you're starting at $850,000, $900,000. We're saving about 10% of that with the solar. So that kind of, I guess those are the numbers I have. I think one other question that was raised was the educational context for electric vehicle chargers. Why does the school system care about this? The Clean Energy Task Force actually has about a 3-year history of educational outreach, starting with I believe, working with Dr. Boyce, we made a proposal to teach a class that's free. I do that as a volunteer, teaching about electric vehicle technology and the fact that there's 35 different models and they save money if you buy them and all of these things. So you can go to the Continuing Ed website and learn about that. Then also 3 years ago, we had 5 interns from Ward High School do a study of all the rooftops in town to look at solar energy production capability. And they were actually paid interns. And they did the study, and it's been of great value to the town and the Clean Energy Task Force. And then last year, it really went to a new level, and we did what I would call a Clean Energy Roadshow, and it started with being invited to the Gifted and Talented program at Dwight Elementary, and we went and presented on renewable energy and electric vehicles and sustainable transportation, did some hands-on demonstration to the Gifted and Talented program, and at the end, the Dwight teacher took a spin in my electric car around the parking lot to the amusement of all the kids. They were very excited. And then word got out, and so I ended up going to Osborne Hill. I ended up going to Riverfield. We went to Stratfield. That was about as much as I could volunteer in the elementary. And then at the end of the year, we also presented to both of the AP Environmental Science classes. So we presented to Ward and Ludlow about their solar projects and about this project that you will hopefully approve. And we told the kids there, you know, instead of asking for a new car for graduation, because they're mostly seniors, ask for a new electric car. So, but I'll tell you, the fifth graders, they really, really get it. You get one word out of your mouth, and the hands go up, and they ask really, really smart questions. So it was a really rewarding experience. So I hope you can approve this project so we can go forward and continue to do this work in the Fairfield School District.
Thank you. Do I have questions from the board? Mrs. Gerber?
Yeah, thank you first for answering some of the questions that I had. I had sent some questions to Mr. Cullen, and he had forwarded it to you, and so you replied, so I do really appreciate that.
You're welcome.
One question I have, I went back and watched the Board of Selectmen meeting where Mr. Bowman presented to them, and he said at the time he thought there were about 14 teachers between the two high schools who had expressed interest. He said like 8 at one and 6 at the other.
I have not heard that.
Okay.
I've heard about 3 or 4 different inquiries.
Okay.
Yeah.
But I guess then the question is, I know you said if you build it, they will come, but let's just say they don't come, and we install these, which won't be at any cost, and we have them at our schools. Will there be, if nobody uses them, I guess, will we not have any expenses then?
There would be no expenses.
So
That's
it's
right.
so basically, however, the more they're used, the more expensive it'll be, potentially. The higher the cost will be, I guess, is what I'm saying.
That's exactly right. And let me just say, there's no specific meter for the units. They're just tied to the panel for the school. So it gets bundled in with the other $800,000 of electricity.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Now, I think the charging stations at the rec center, those are tied into the solar panels that are there, correct?
In a sense, but they're still tied to the grid. And so the solar panel offsets some of the usage that the rec center has, and that's really essentially no different than what we would be doing at the high schools. The solar system offsets some of your usage. The charging stations, basically any electricity is used, takes a little bit away from the savings that you gain from the solar, but it's still coming out of the overall usage for the school, just like the lights and the computers and the air conditioning. Yeah.
Okay. I mean, I guess my biggest concern with this, and I think the work that your committee's been doing is great, and I'm thrilled about the solar panels that we have at our schools, but, you know, every year we have to, you know, fight for every penny in our budget. And if we have $1,200 that we now have to have baked into our budget every year, assuming that this estimate is approximately right, that just makes me uncomfortable and concerned, just because I feel like, I know it seems minuscule in comparison with the size of our budget, but $1,200 is still $1,200. And while I appreciate the savings that we get from the solar panels, we'd be able to enjoy all of those savings without the $1,200 cost. So that's honestly my biggest concern with this, is just $1,200, really.
Yeah, if I could address again, that estimate is extremely conservative, and it kind of assumes that everyone has cars now and are going to be plugging them in on day one. So there's another point, which is one of the conditions of the grant is that the charging stations remain free for 3 years.
Right.
I think by the time we get to that increased usage, 3 years will probably be behind us, and the town or the school system could decide to charge for the usage, and it would be within your rights.
Right.
And I think that's maybe easier said than done, but I think it's kind of simple to do, like a membership or a club of EV owners, whether they're students or teachers, could pay into that and recapture some of the electricity costs. So there's actually a potential for revenue here, actually.
Somewhat, but it sounded like in your response to me in the email that really wasn't an option. I mean, as you know, just in terms of, would we put a credit card machine in? How would that work, just in terms of being able to?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Metering, in that email response, metering I think would be difficult because it would require you to invest in more infrastructure to credit card reader and metering.
Right.
But to have a club would be actually very simple, or to charge a parking fee, and you could very easily recapture revenue if the demand got high enough that you were legitimately concerned about the electricity costs.
Right. Well, and so I guess just one other, well, I'm sorry, two other really quick things. First of all, how do we control whether or not on weekends or evenings people don't come onto the school site and use the chargers, which would then really, I would think, spike the usage? I mean, we don't have, moats around our schools, so people would be able to come in and use them theoretically quite a bit.
That's a great question. Actually, one of the conditions of the grant is that the EV chargers are open to the public. In the case of the schools, we specifically made an exception to that because we said that overnight parking is not allowed and weekend parking is not allowed, and the DEP accepted that. So we did note that in the grant. In terms of policing it, I think that the police that are there
And I think
see
that would
overnight
be
parking.
problematic because, our high schools host a tremendous amount of activities every weekend and on evenings. And, so someone could say, oh, I'm parking my car here, and they could be charging it up. I'm just trying to think of worst case scenario in terms of costs. I mean, that would be a concern for me. And just kind of to segue into, I know there is a charging station at Riverfield, which I actually wasn't aware of. But I was just curious, how has the usage been there for that charging station?
Sure. The Riverfield is really, it's what's called a level 1. What we're proposing here are level 2. These are 220 volt, 30 amp. These are real heavier duty chargers. That's at Riverfield is what's called a level 1. And there's one right behind you. It's basically a wall outlet, and they use 1/5 of the power. And they went in with the building project. And to date, I've only had one person, maybe two people, report anyone's used them. And I've been meaning to get over to Riverfield to talk to the teachers to explain to them how they can benefit from using the charging station. I just haven't really had the time to make yet another presentation.
Right.
But,
No, I understand.
But on the weekend charging question, back to the high schools, what we see around town is for charging stations that are in really desirable locations, like the best example is the library at Fairfield Woods Library. We do see some neighbors that will go in there and plug in. I think that's also the case for the other one at Sherman Green. But for the ones that are, if you will, in more like remote areas, I don't want to say remote, but not near like shopping areas or heavy use areas, we really don't see people, if you will, driving to a different location to plug in and then picking up their car later. It happens. I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but it's very, very rare.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Did I see Mrs. Maxon Kennelly's hand go up, followed by Ms. Pitko?
I'll echo some of Mrs. Gerber's concerns, and that what I I think I love everything you say, from the academic component to just the societal component of in support of clean energy. My two questions are, I don't understand why this isn't being asked to be put into the town budget, and since it's town property. And then my second question is questioning the placement of it in these two locations at all, considering I would think the point would be to get it where it is more accessible, and now we have added that level of difficulty of making sure that no one thinks that this is just open for the public to use. I recognize that educational aspect, but again, I don't understand it not being part of the town budget, and I don't understand the placement, how
Sure.
that was arrived at.
So the reason it's not in the town budget is because these are tied to the high school meters, and those electricity bills are paid for, I think, by the school system. So there's really no way to do a separate meter, and actually then you'd have to pay another monthly fee just for having the meter. So the EV chargers, the $20,000 of infrastructure, that essentially will be paid for by the town and then be reimbursed by the grant. There's no net cost, but to meter the electricity usage, which again, I know I put $600 in there per year, but it's a really, really conservative estimate. I'm sure that it's going to be, in reality, much less than that. And then your second question was?
Understanding the placement in the first place, why
Okay.
these were selected.
Yeah, that's a great, so there's two different types of grants that we get for EV chargers. One is just government grants, and they can go in at any government facility. The second type, and that's this type, is what's called a fleet grant. And it is really geared toward providing chargers where there are, if you will, employees of the town working. And so, yes, I know we separate town and schools in Fairfield, but these high schools are probably, I don't know what the numbers are, but they're probably among the biggest employers in Fairfield. And so, we saw that as a really good match to this type of grant, and the grant is $10,000 versus the other type, which is $4,000. So we essentially get these great infrastructure for free. The second thing was, we've gotten feedback, especially from RTM members, that there's a lot of charging stations in the center of town, but there's nothing, if you will, on the east side of town. So we really had targeted Ward High School as being a facility that was on the east side of town, and that could kind of hit this geographical disparity that we have. And then once you apply for one high school, you really have to do them both. So my daughter goes to Ludlow. I would never hear the end of it.
Thank you.
Ms. Pitko, followed by Mr. Llewellyn.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson. I'm a science teacher. I've taught for the last 9 years in middle school, and now I'm teaching high school, and I teach through Energize Connecticut, and I'm all about alternative energy. Tonight I have my Board of Ed hat on, and I have to echo what Mrs. Gerber and Mrs. Maxon Kelly said. I find it very hard to put this in our budget for next year, knowing how it's going to go. And I would be more inclined if we had alternative energy sources at the high school, like solar power, to offset the cost. Because really it is a consumption that we're now taking. We're basically powering the cars, but the school district would be paying for it. And that's where I take issue with this.
So we do have, there are solar projects that just went live this spring at both of the high schools, and that is in the handout. They're what are called power purchase agreements. And essentially what it means is that you, and it was great to teach this to the high school students, to the APES kids. You basically give the vendor, the solar vendor, access to the roof, and they design, build, own, operate, maintain, install the solar systems, which were done at both high schools. And in exchange, they charge the town, instead of 16 cents, or the school system, instead of 16 cents for power, 10 cents. And so it's those solar systems that represent the basis of the energy savings of $90,000 a year. And to your point, when the school is in operation and those solar systems are making power, that power is being used by the school. If it makes extra, it gets sent to the grid. Say, for example, on a weekend, not during air conditioning season, you're sending extra electricity into the grid, and that's being counted by your meter. But during the day, there's probably a good, especially during the months of March, April, May, June, September, October, a lot of the energy, including the lights, the computers, the air conditioning, and the EV chargers, which again are equivalent to washing a load of laundry, drying a load of laundry, would come from that solar power.
So if I can comment on the three comments regarding where should this be in the budget. A lot of times the placement of a cost item in our budget is governed by kind of administrative supervision and accounting issues. And so in the instance of the crossing guards and the nurses that are in our schools, they all benefit 100% our schools, but they're carried on the town side of the budget because that's who supervises them, and it's easier to account for them there. We all know that the principal and interest on all of our buildings are carried on the town side of the budget as well. The security staff, that new security team that are stationed in our schools but are carried on the town side of the budget. And so this would be, compared to those costs that the town absorbs on their side of the budget, absorbing this in our budget because it would be a very, very small percentage of the electric bill that Tom would have to calculate and then send a bill to the town for those small dollar amounts on a quarterly basis. I think this is a fair amount for us to absorb, considering that we are one town and they carry a lot of expenses for us. Mr. Llewellyn.
Thank you. You had said that part of the grant is that the units are open to the public. So are we able on school property to restrict the use during school hours to students and teachers only? Or do they need to be open to the wider public?
No, the grant application says that they have to be open to the public, but when we wrote our grant, we said we needed an exception because the school system does not allow overnight parking in general public use. So we can absolutely put signage or restrict or advise the security to not allow charging after hours or on the weekends.
But if I live walking distance from Ludlow and want to go plug in during the day, can I do that?
I would think you could, yeah.
Okay, so they're, okay.
I mean, if you would have to violate whatever signage was put up there saying don't do it, but
that's the question. If they're open to the public, they're open to the public, and we can't restrict that as a district, I wouldn't think. Or they're not open to the public.
maybe I don't understand the question. Are you asking,
Could I interrupt for a moment?
Yeah.
Perhaps a staff person through Dr. Tracy could
probably not a
answer
fair
the
question
question.
for you. I apologize.
Could answer the question that can headmasters and principals who see a member of the public on school property during school hours say, you're not allowed on school property during school hours unless you are a parent or a student? Can somebody answer whether that's a current policy or practice we have? I think that's what, Mr. Llewellyn, I think that's what you're trying to get at?
It's that, but if, which I suspect the answer is going to be, we can restrict to students and teachers. Does that violate the grant, which says they have to be open to the public?
And I understand the answer is no, that we have an exception carved out for the schools.
No, we have an exception at night and on weekends, is what I heard.
Yeah, that's right. We said that.
So during the weekdays, if they have to be open to members of the public.
Well, during the weekdays is the estimated cost worst-case scenario. But the reality is that we hope that teachers and maybe at some point students will have EVs. They'll be parked there and using them, so no one will be able to access them because they're parked there.
Okay, and so that was another question I had. So when a teacher or a student hooks up, it's kind of an all-day thing, right?
That's how we assumed it, yeah, that
Okay.
they would be plugged in there. But I think the vision for this would be that each school would form kind of a club,
And
and they may
days.
have appointments.
Right.
Where more people could access these 2 chargers at each school.
Okay. And then, I suppose in order to get around your night and weekend thing, you just put timers on them, so there's no power going to them at night. That would prevent people from trying to use them at night. One of the other questions is, we have the fields that all have very high voltage and high amperage out to them. And I look at your maps, from a security perspective, are we better off putting them near the stadiums? And this might be from Mr. Morbido. Are we better off putting them near the stadiums as opposed to right outside of each school building?
Yeah, the reason those locations were selected, and it was with site visits with Mr. Morbido and the vendor, was to minimize the trench run to the electrical panel so that the project costs would fall within the grant so that there would be
Yeah,
no...
they need to be close, this is Tom Cullen, Director of Operations. They need to be close to our electrical closets and rooms in those high schools.
Well, you've got your lights for both football fields, which I'm sure are well in excess of 30 amps at 220 volts, which aren't hopefully being run during the day.
Those lights are usually 3-phase power, and they
Yeah, this is
also
different.
So you'd
only
have to
go on at
step down.
night, whereas this, yeah.
Well, that's right, but the power's there.
We've looked into that at other facilities, and light poles look like a great spot to put them, but they're not energized. They're energized back at the source, not at the light.
Got it. Okay.
And they're also a
That's good to
different
know.
type of power.
Yep. Okay.
Anything
Thank you.
else?
No, I'm good.
Any other questions from board members or any other comments that people wish to make? Mr. Calabrese, followed by Mrs. Maxon Connelly.
Sure. For me, this one it's really a no-brainer. I work at the rec department now, so I see the 2 that we have there. People are plugged into them every day. We have one across the street at the commuter lot. People are plugged into it. You go down to the Sherman Green, people are plugged into it. You know, to go forward with the town's clean energy action plan, this fits right within that. So again, it's a no-brainer. The benefits, you're not losing any parking. People could plug in. Granted, I would love to see kids driving electric vehicles. If we have some teachers that do it, and there's no cost to the town right now. $1,200. Okay, but we're saving $90,000 with the solar we have now, and again, it goes with the rest of the solar projects that we've put in place, and we continue to put in place. So I think it follows our action plan right now. So I like this project.
Mrs. Maxon Connelly.
Actually, through the chair to Mrs. Gerber, and I apologize, I did not get the chance to watch those town meetings, so I don't know exactly the nature of the conversation that took place, but was the gist coming out of that from Board of Selectmen and Board of Finance that they supported this project?
The Board of Selectmen, it was very brief. There was a brief presentation. They voted unanimously to approve it. The Board of Finance, a number of different members had questions and also felt that they did not want to approve something without the Board of Education approving it, since the money was coming out of the Board of Education budget. So they specifically postponed the vote and asked that the matter be given to us to vote on. And they've postponed their vote until November to make sure that we would, have the time to discuss and vote on it ourselves. So I think they had questions. I think they had some concerns. They weren't out and out saying no, but they also felt, because it's school property and the cost to the school budget, that the Board of Education at the very least needed to be made aware of it and, weigh in on it. So that was kind of where they were.
Okay, because I would say I would just thank Mr. Dwyer for providing that reminder to the board about the shared issue with our budget. Good reminder, and thus my question about the other town bodies.
Okay, thank you. If there's no other comments from board members, go to the public. Oh, I'm sorry.
I
You had
do
a
want to
comment.
just make one update to the handout that you got. Just at the bottom, it says project challenges, that the grant actually expired and they won't approve an extension. In a bizarre twist, Deep contacted me yesterday, and Ed Bowman, and said, are you still interested in continuing with the project? We said, yes, we need to still seek town approvals, but they actually granted us an extension already till December 31st. And working with Tom's group, we need to do the work if it's approved at a time when it won't interrupt school operations. But the grant was actually extended. But
Thank you for that
It's
clarification.
breathing down my neck.
I'm sorry, Mrs. Gerber.
Yeah, I guess this is to the chair, just kind of a technical question. Since, I guess, the initial protocol was going to be Board of Selectmen approved, Board of Finance approved, then the Board of Finance said that they wanted the Board of Ed to approve that. So are we kind of setting a precedent where future projects similar to this, let's say that this is successful, and they decide to have it at other schools, so now automatically are we always going to be approving this? Simply because we didn't approve the Riverfield project, and I realized that was part of the building committee. They added that, but I just didn't know if this is something that now we've been added into the line of approvals permanently, or if this is just specifically because the Board of Finance specifically requested.
I think the latter. This is town property, and so I think the town could make a decision without the Board of Ed. I think the Board of Finance chose this time to involve us, but I will check with the chairman whether this represents a change of protocol that they're going to follow in the future. I'll check. Mrs. Lou McCormick. I'm just making a note so I didn't forget. Mrs. Lou McCormick.
So I just want to clarify, I guess to the chair or to you, is the operating budget then paying for the plugins at Riverfield even though we didn't approve it at the Board of Ed?
So the installation of the chargers, there was no grant for Riverfield, but again, they're different than these. These are real chargers. What's in Riverfield is basically just an outlet like the one behind you on the wall. So it uses 1/5 of the power that these use. And so if anyone were using those, yes, that would be basically, it's tied to the school's electric panel, and it is counted as part of their electric bill.
So now we have an ongoing charge to the education budget that wasn't approved by the board. And so now what we're being asked to is going forward, we want to set a precedent that ongoing charges that aren't necessarily related to education but are related to energy usage for the public should be funded by the school's budget. And by doing so, we're now opening the door to future funding of energy from the school's budget, not necessarily for educational purposes. Is that correct?
I think that as a volunteer, I
Yeah,
probably don't.
I consider what's correct is that the town, on their initiative, installed solar panels that saved our budget $90,000. The town did that.
I understand. No, I'm asking about
so
this.
I think we're one town and we're working together, and we'll find out whether the protocol that is being established here for this particular project is one that will go forward in the future.
I guess what concerns me is that this becomes a precedent setting, and then where does it end? And suddenly the school's budget is funding energy for the public usage rather than dedicating all its resources to education, which was the purpose of separating, I think, the town budget from the school budget. If this is for the benefit of the town, I just don't understand what the purpose would be by doing this going forward. The money is somewhat fungible, except that we can't always reach into the town's pocket to then ask for more money for books or to hire another teacher. And to the extent we are, I know right now it always starts little, but by opening this up, this just sets the stage to continue to grow.
Yeah, I think
actually,
the representation is that the majority of users of this will be faculty and staff, not the public.
That's right, and we, just to address Mrs. Gerber's point, and related to this, we don't have designs to do this in every school. We saw that the high schools were Because let me just make this really important point about electric vehicle adoption. So electric vehicle technology is moving ahead, and what we're trying to do is accelerate that transition to the benefit of our air and our planet. We're trying to accelerate that transition. What is needed to do that is really an educational awareness. This infrastructure isn't necessarily important for people to be able to plug in, but they need to see that it's there so that they feel comfortable switching to an electric car. And so we don't need to do this in every school, but as using the high schools as a showpiece for both the student and teacher population at our two largest schools, but also for every other student in town that's going to eventually go there, and know that those high schools can charge electric vehicles. That's an exciting thing. I can't wait to tell, in fact, I did tell fifth graders this year that we were working on these projects. The gleam in their eye is amazing. And so having everybody funneling through the high schools and being able to realize that infrastructure is really kind of the vision that we have, not to do it in every school.
Well, if I may, so the problem isn't about alternative energy. I think alternative energy is wonderful, and the whole initiative is wonderful. What concerns me is that we are taking funds from education to fund the alternative energy. And this, to me, is comparable to saying, let's say everybody got electric cars, right? So everyone's plugging in, which is an awesome outcome. However, that happened with gasoline. Would we really want to be, should we be funding the gasoline that fuels the teachers' cars right now and the students' cars? Should the schools be funding and paying for that? Because that energy is being used not just to go back and forth to school, it's being used for their daily lives. And that similarly would be what this electricity is an alternative for, is for that gas. And I understand the bigger purpose. The question is this is coming out of a big pot. So why are we commingling it out of the school budget? And that concerns me, because this is supposed to be for education, not for energy.
Thank you.
Should I respond, or?
There's a commentary. I don't know that there's a response that is necessary. Mr. Llewellyn.
I just have a quick follow-up. The Riverfield one that was installed, was that paid for, how was that done? Was that paid for by a grant as well?
No, it's essentially a wall outlet in the parking lot, and it was as part of the overall capital school construction project.
So there's no hardware? There's no thing you plug into, it's literally just a socket? Or is there an apparatus as well?
There's a
step-up?
post,
Okay.
and there's an outlet mounted to it.
And that post doesn't contain any transformer, step up, step down, it's just straight 110?
There's a conduit 110 running from the panel.
Okay.
And because the parking lot was all ripped up,
It's
they
like
were able
running to a
to-
light post?
they were able to run it to a
Okay.
post, and yeah. There's two there, that's right, yeah.
Okay. And then, can you add a timer, or would you add a timer to these so that, you know, the issue, I mean, I hear the whole financial issue, if it's a benefit straight to the teachers, you know, that's great, but if people are coming in and plugging in on those nights and weekends, then it truly is coming out of I mean, it is coming out of our budget either way, but not for the direct beneficiary. And what you've said about folks at the Fairfield Woods Library, you know, you see neighborhoods coming and plugging in. I'm just wondering if it's benefiting such a small group of individuals. You know, I could see doing this if you could tell us there's going to be a timer and these things are going to be off after dark and off on weekends, because what I don't want it to do is attract security issues to the individual schools. I think, you know, we've heard from the high schools that, you know, they can limit the traffic so that we're getting our target audience and we're not increasing security issues.
I don't know if a timer could be installed, but I would imagine that there could simply be someone that flicks the breaker-ons during the school day and turns it off, just like a light switch. I know we don't turn the lights off, though.
Or the computer monitors.
But I don't know, I'd really, to give you an honest answer, I don't know how that would be, if that would be possible. I would think so, but I don't know for sure.
I think Mrs. Gerber has the last question or comment.
Thank you.
Yeah, well, just to piggyback on that through the chair to Mr. Cullen, is there some way that we would be able to control it to ensure that only staff and students are able to use it during school hours?
I like the idea of a timer, because right now there's a policy in place that there is no overnight parking or weekend parking. If there is somebody that has a request and has got an approval to park, we notify the police. So the police has the make of the car and the model, the license plate, and they know they're going to be there. So the police know that as they're touring around the district, they see a car at a school site parking lot overnight or on a weekend, they tag it and try and find out who it is. That's the policy right now. I don't know how we would deal with.
Well, I guess my
These-
question is, let's say, Labor Day weekend, Ludlow High School and Ward host the FUSA travel soccer tournament where there are hundreds of cars going in and out of the parking lot all weekend. If there was a switch or a breaker or a timer or something like that, it wouldn't matter. I mean, I understand the nighttime issues and the overnight and
Yep.
everything like that, but I'm talking about during the day on weekends
during
when
the
we
day.
have multiple
Yeah.
school events taking place at both Ludlow and Ward. So if there's some way to ensure that they're switched off during non-school hours, I know I personally would be really happy then to support this, because I like the idea of it, and I like the idea of the staff and the students being able to utilize it. I don't like the idea of it being used by anyone who comes into the Ludlow or Ward parking lot on weekends, summers, things like that. So if there's
Understand.
some way to control it, is there definitely some way that we can control it?
Not, right now, there is not a plan to control it.
But could
But
there
we'd
be,
have to-
I
yeah,
guess?
there could
Some
be.
simple, is there something simple? I don't know anything
Yeah,
about.
I think Scott mentioned school team that would get together and assign people to the spot. But as far as stopping some public member coming in and parking there and then driving away with another vehicle or somebody else taking them away, certainly the SRO on that campus, the police officer would notice.
Right, but can we
But-
just switch off the charger?
I don't know that. I don't have an answer for that.
But if it's possible, you could arrange
It's
staff to do
possible, we
that.
certainly will.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm not an electrical engineer, but I think it would be possible, and we'll look into that and try to do that if it can be done.
Thank you. Ms. Kennelly?
I'm not an electrical engineer either, but, everybody that's on the campus, students and faculty, wear IDs or have IDs. Couldn't there be something where they have to put their ID into the machine, which would allow them? Like I put my charge card in to get gas.
So
All
so
the time.
Yeah, no, the machines are not smart. The machine, it's basically like.
Well, send them to school.
Yeah, no, these are not the more sophisticated machines that have the telemetry and have the access codes and the credit card capability. They cost twice as much.
Okay.
And we didn't think that was appropriate. So again, we see this as part of our, the Clean Energy Action Plan, which includes solar and, the 90,000 in savings, plus there's many other schools that are getting solar. I think, the count is probably 300,000 in savings per year when those projects are done. This is a small deduction, hypothetical, that could be recovered by charging people for usage through a club membership in the future. And, again, I hope you can approve it.
Sorry, just one more.
Last comment, and then we'll go to the public.
Right, but just to clarify, that being able to charge people won't happen until after 3 years.
That's
So right now,
correct.
we're talking about for 3 years, we cannot charge anyone.
That's correct.
So, again, I would just say, through the chair to Mr. Cullen, if there is some way that, some low-cost way, obviously, that the district can switch off the chargers during non-school hours, I think this is a great idea. I think this is really good, and it's not going to cost a tremendous amount of money. I just don't like the idea of approving something that anyone who can drive into the parking lot at any time can use.
Understood.
Thank you.
Question to the chair.
Please do.
So I can make an amendment that would include the use of timers, or we can defer the vote on this to our meeting in 2 weeks, which I don't think, will that set back the town bodies?
I don't know the answer to that question. In terms of the timing of this, you're trying to get this installed so that you don't lose the grant
By
by
12/31.
the end of the year. if we waited until 10:18 to make this decision?
I personally, I like the idea of the timers too, so I would be happy with the amendment.
Okay.
And
Would you like an
believe
amendment?
that the timers could fit within your grant?
The timers won't be more than a couple $100 because they'll be
Right.
inside and locked up.
That's the assumption that you're making.
I would not
Yeah,
presume.
And I will go to my Clean Energy Task Force meeting tomorrow. We have a small discretionary budget, and maybe we could cover that incremental cost if there were one.
So, Mr. Llewellyn, the motion that's on your agenda, that the Board of Education approve the installation of 2, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, till you get down to the parentheses, 4 units total, that might be a good place to
That's what I was thinking as well.
insert
Which will be
something about timers.
Which will be controlled by timers
Or switches?
timers. I want automatic. I don't want to rely on somebody remembering. Which will be controlled by timers to allow use Monday through Friday, 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. unless someone wants to change that, daylight hours basically. And paid for within, okay, so we'll just stop at the 7 a.m.
Yeah.
to 7 p.m., which will be paid for by the grant fund. So based
Yeah,
on where I've inserted that,
yeah,
those times
paid
need to
for
be
by
paid for
is
within
part
the
of the
grant.
motion, right?
It's part of the motion, correct. So it can't cost the district.
So
So this will,
let me read this, make sure the secretary has it. After the word "be" and before the word "paid," controlled by a comma, controlled by timers.
Wait, I'm sorry. Where are you?
it was, I was.
Oh, no,
putting it
after
parenthetical,
total.
That's fine.
After total, and before the word "which," controlled by timers to allow use Monday through Friday, 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., comma, which will be paid for by the grant from the Connecticut DEP. Is that how you want it to read?
I think so.
Or the Clean Energy Task Force. Paid for by the grant or the Clean Energy Task Force.
I will accept that as well.
Thank you.
Sure.
Mr. Llewellyn makes the motion, Mrs. Gerber makes the second, so that people know exactly what we're voting on. Can the secretary read the two sections that have been added?
Well, I'll just read the entire motion so that anyone from the public wants to comment. That the Board of Education approve the installation of 2 EV charging stations at Fairfield Ward High School and 2 EV charging stations at Fairfield Ludlow High School, 4 units total, which will be controlled by timers to allow use Monday through Friday, 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., which will be paid for by a grant from the CTDEP or the Clean Energy Task Force.
Does that sound?
Works for me, thank you.
Does the board understand the motion that's now in front of you as an amendment first and then the main motion? If so, then let's go to the public. This would be a comment on the amendment and the amendment only, those 2 extra phrases that have been added. Any member of the public wish to come forward and speak, please state your name and address.
Suzanne Miska, 123 Rygate Road. My first problem with this is not necessarily the cost, surprisingly. It's the location at Ludlow on probably the most traveled section of the school. If we can put it in the teacher parking lot to the front of the school, I would like it much better. Because while I appreciate we have some sort of agreement where there's no overnight parking in our schools, if you were to leave here and drive by all of our schools, you will find there are people parked in the parking lots. That includes Roger Ludlow Middle School and Fairfield Ludlow High School. So if we put these to the front of the school where the lights are on, we might stand to at least draw attention if someone is plugged in who is obviously not a teacher. My other problem here is I am confused as a member of the public because we've got a grant that is supposed to be open to the entire town, putting charging stations at schools, and now we've got an amendment that will shut them off, so I don't know how the grant still functions. It just makes no sense to me that we're going to get a grant, but we can put our switches on it and all of that, and it's still going to fly. you know, with all due respect to the clean energy, I'm all for it, but with all due respect to the town bodies, not necessarily this body, the taxpayers have really not been included in this conversation. And while I respect the situation at Parks and Rec, those panels are awful and an eyesore to the town. So I think until all the questions can be answered, and we can make sure that the i's are dotted and the t's are crossed on this, so that it doesn't come back and say, oh, by the way, we can't do this anymore. But you've now got these charging stations. I think we need to make sure that it's right. My other big question here is, well, they're nice and new right now. My concern is, what's the maintenance cost for these as we go forward and they become more popular or they get older? Who pays for the replacement when that needs to take place?
Thank you very much. Anybody else? Let me get more public up here. Anybody else from the public wish to make a comment? Seeing nobody come forward, back to the board. Any final comments? Mrs. Gerber, Mr. Llewellyn, Mrs. Lou McCormick.
So, Mr. Thompson, will this be a problem with the grant putting this language in with the timers?
I don't believe so, but we'll be sure to double-check that with Connecticut Deep.
Okay, and do you know what the cost would be long-term for maintenance for charging stations?
They are generally covered by warranty for a set number of years, and then after that, the town has a contractor under a maintenance agreement to take care of repairs.
Okay.
But I don't know what the cost is.
All right, thanks.
Mr. Llewellyn.
In terms of the grant, do we have a minimum required time period beyond the 3 years to keep this installed? In other words, you know, we're 3 years out, we fulfilled that obligation, this thing breaks down. From the picture we've been provided, it looks like it literally just plugs into a wall.
Can I hate to be the Roberts Rules person, but we're on the amendment rather than questions on the fundamental main motion. Answer the question, and then let's remind ourselves that we're on the amendment.
Good point.
So if it broke at any time, you don't have to fix it. If it broke the day after it was installed, but it would be under warranty. But if it broke 3 years from now, you don't have to fix it. The only 3-year obligation is that it is to be free to use. And then after that, you can start charging for it, charging money.
And do you know the breakdown in cost between the unit and the install?
Yeah, the cost of the unit equipment is very low. If we're talking about just the charger, those are on the order of $1,500 each, whereas it's the labor, the trenching, the paving, the concrete work, that's the real money.
Okay. And we are just talking about the amendment.
Mrs.
Thank
Lou
you for
McCormick, do you have a question on the amendment? If not, let's
I mean,
act on the amendment, and then we can get to the main motion.
This is related to the amendment as to whether I can be okay with it or not. So regarding the cost for the repairs and the maintenance, if it should be, you know, whatever it is beyond the warranty time period, where is that cost absorbed? Is that within the school operating budget?
There's no plan for that. That would be to be determined if and when that occurred.
Who owns the equipment?
The town of Fairfield.
So we're
One answer could be that if we chose not to fix it, we chose not to fix it. If the town then chose to fix it because they think it's in their best interest.
That's right, exactly
Nobody can tell us how to spend our maintenance dollars.
So
the grant doesn't say that.
So the school is only responsible for the electricity. We pay for the electricity usage out of our budget.
The electricity goes into your meter, that's right. And
Right, so we pay for it out of our school budget.
right.
Whoever charged out of there forever, how long, for the 3 years without any ability to charge them. And there's no other costs that would come out of our operating budget related to it, only the electrical usage.
Only if it broke and you chose to want to fix it or chose not to, right? So there's no obligation, if you will.
And the warranty is for how long?
1 year.
I think they're 2 years, but it might be one. It's 1 or 2 years.
These
I'm
are
not
1 year
sure.
ones.
So then there's 2 possible years where there is question as to who has to fix
3
it.
year.
and we're still under a 3-year obligation
GE provides
to
a
maintain
3-year
it.
warranty, it says.
Oh, is it 3 years? Thank you. The 3 years is you can't charge money for people to use it for 3 years.
Right. Okay.
And it's under warranty for 3 years.
It's under warranty. I'm sorry. Thank you, Mr. Llewellyn.
Yep, no problem. And I'm going to confirm one thing. One of the points that Ms. Miska brought up was that there were 2 points as it relates to outsiders using it. I'm still not sure if the grant is good or not good if we restrict it to folks within the school, but we've got parking that we have control over. I'm not sure if that's in violation of the grant. That's for you guys to kind of figure out.
Yeah.
But you do have specifically from the state or from whomever is providing the grant, a carve-out that says no nights and weekends usage, correct?
In our application, we informed them that we could not
Okay.
agree to that condition.
Okay, so that makes the timer piece of it at least copacetic with
In my
the grant
mind, it
itself.
does. In my mind, it does.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
I will verify.
Does everybody understand the amendment that we are voting on? Any questions on the amendment? If not, then all in favor of the amendment as proposed by Mr. Llewellyn, please raise your hand. Ms. Carnell, Mrs. Gerber, Mr. Dwyer, Mrs. Maxon Connelly, Mr. Llewellyn. Opposed? Mrs. Lou McCormick, Mr. Calabrese, Ms. Pitko. 5-3, the motion passes. Correct? So now back to the main motion. If there's no further conversation on the main motion, out to the public for the main motion as amended. Any member of the public wish to come forward to talk about the main motion as amended? Seeing nobody come forward, does the board understand the motion in front of you, including the main motion as amended, or shall we read it? Everybody understand it? Okay, all in favor of the recommended motion as stated on the agenda as amended, please raise your hand. Ms. Carnell, Mrs. Gerber, Mr. Dwyer, Mr. Calabrese, Mrs. Maxon Connelly, Mr. Llewellyn, opposed. Mrs. Lou McCormick, Ms. Pitko, the motion passes 6-2. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And thank you for your leadership on this, as well as your presence tonight. Much appreciated.
Thank you for your time as well.
We've covered 6B, so on to 6C, which is back to the Policy Committee Chair. Oh, no, calendar, yes, sorry. The calendar is in front of you. It is here for a, quote, first reading. It will be on the October 18th board agenda for approval. Dr. Tracy, do you have any comments you wish to make on the calendar?
Only to thank Ms. Parks and all the folks who reviewed it and checked it. If there are any questions about it, we'll be happy to take them.
Any comments at the moment from board members? Mrs. Maxon Connelly, followed by Mr. Llewellyn.
Oh.
Mr. Coyne, I'll say it in the microphone. Mr. Coyne and I are both responsible for the calendar, so I appreciate.
For 6 months, she took the rest.
My only question on the calendar was in October, the 17th and 18th, just coming from the mindset of knowing how oftentimes having the high school sibling at home for the arrival of elementary school kids factors into some family planning. I was wondering if there was any reason that the 17th couldn't be moved to the 18th.
We had not discussed that. We can certainly,
No, I'm sorry.
the 18th can't be moved to the 17th.
No, I understand that. That's why I was
Because it's PSATs and we don't choose that date.
Right.
But what you're saying is have the
PD early
day
dismissal
on
day.
both days. So we can certainly bring that back to the team.
Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Llewellyn.
General question, is this in sync with our move to kind of a regional calendar, and when does that go official? Or has that just been pushed out like most things of the state?
Do you wish to address that question about how does this conform to the CES
Yes.
schedule?
Yes, it does.
Okay.
And yes, it's already in effect.
It is. So we don't have
Yes.
to vote on this, actually, right? We do, but.
Oh, yeah, you have some leeway.
5 days at
Yeah,
a shift.
it's not
Yeah.
quite totally lockstep yet, so you do have a little bit of leeway.
So we do have to vote on it next, on the 18th. Any other questions or comments that board members wish to give to the staff? You'll take a look at the suggestion from Mrs. Maxon Kennelly.
We will.
And let us know whether you're able to change it or not, and if you're not, why, and all the rest.
Can anyone ask Mr. Coyne a question?
Any questions about Mrs. Parks?
Ms. Carnell, do you have a question on the schedule?
To Mr. Coyne,
Thank you.
how was your day today?
It was great. I didn't have to work today, so.
Okay.
Thanks.
This is his idea of a good time. Thank you both.
So now to the first reading of policies. Mrs. Maxon Kennelly.
So this first, hold on, I've got them in the wrong order. First policy for admission, please note if you go to the 4th page, the extremely succinct, for good or for ill, 3 paragraphs of the existing policy and what that has transitioned to in terms of 2 full pages of text. So normally we like to make clear with bold where there's amended language. In this case, it was just easier to show you what it was so that we don't highlight literally almost the entire thing. So that's 5111, and then with 5113, attendance, excuses and dismissals. The big change there is especially with the work of the state regarding chronic absenteeism, which is very clear from the language that's been highlighted. But as always, if there are any questions now, be happy to address them. But otherwise, if you look it over more carefully and have more, I would certainly appreciate getting questions emailed in advance, if possible.
Questions for the chair at the moment? Mr.
I've got 2 for you. On the first one, second page, we talk about any district will immediately enroll any student who transfers from Unified District 1 or Unified District 2. Unified District 1, I believe, is Hartford, and Unified District 2, I believe, is Middleton? No? What are they? Well, that's what Google told me.
So,
Oh, we need Mr. Coyne for this, right?
Actually, I used to run one of those districts.
Okay.
so before everybody steps up, Dr. Tracy, do you have an answer to that question?
Unified, you're thinking of regional school districts.
You're right.
Unified District 1 is with the Department of Corrections, and Unified District 2 is with the Department of Children and Families.
Got it. Okay. Thank you. I was wondering why we were taking transfers automatically from Hartford and...
Not
We're good.
tonight, not tonight.
Perfect. And then, I guess my comment on the second one is on 5113F is the page under students. Highlighted in blue, we're changing something from the district down to the school level. Not sure why, if we're trying to make things common among, that we'd be taking our high school attendance to the school level rather than keeping it at the district level. That only allows for differences.
I'll give a preliminary comment and then welcome Dr. Tracy or Mr. Coyne to weigh in on that. I know part of that is dealing with the, I'm not sure what Fairfield calls it, but in Greenwich we call it the attendance appeals process, that it's one thing to run afoul of losing credit, and then there are within each house of both high schools an appeals process where, individual cases can be examined, and this allows some latitude to that process. And so that was my interpretation of why this suggestion moved forward. I don't know if there's any additional color commentary staff would like to provide beyond that.
The only existing administrative regs for that policy had to do with student dismissals. So there was nothing to address unexcused absences, loss of credit, et cetera, which are all outlined in the handbooks of the two high schools.
And are they identical?
I'm sorry?
Are they identical?
Yes.
Perfect, thank you.
Anything else? Anything else? If not, please do get any other questions to the chairs, policy committee chairs, so that she can respond. These will be on the agenda for action on October 18th.
Chairman Dwyer, I need to work this out with Mr. Coyne to make sure that I'm correct. One thing that we'll be doing if we do move ahead with a vote is looking, sorry, I lost my place. Where's the page you were just on, Mr. Llewellyn?
F.
Sorry. That on page F, that those headings, high school attendance, attendance records, and regularity of attendance, that is the pulling in of existing policies, so this is now all in one. So we would also be moving ahead with looking to delete those existing policies. I hope the board is all right that that would not, if we needed to do a first read and a second read, we could, but it would, that will appear then on the next agenda as well. Assuming we vote to approve this, it will be followed with a move to delete 3 policies which are then redundant.
There are 2 or 3 policies that will get deleted.
3.
So there will be 3 policies on the agenda item. Once we approve these 2, there will be 3 policies on the agenda items called for deletion on the October 18th. And Mr. Coyne will get the proper policy numbers for deletion on the agenda. Okay. Next item is 6E, discussion of and possible action on the consulting agreement between Dr. Tony Jones and the Board of Education. The recommended motion is that the Board of Education approve the consulting agreement dated October 4th, 2016 between the Fairfield Board of Education and Dr. Tony R. Jones. Do I have a motion? Mrs. Gerber, and seconded by Mrs. Jennifer Maxon Kennelly. If the 2 of you don't mind, I'll make a comment. When we went through the search process, we were hopeful to have the new superintendent come on board as soon as possible. There had to be some discussion between her existing district related to her 90-day notice clause, which is how we picked the December 5th date. She's had that discussion with her local board, who have expressed a willingness to release her for 1 week in October and 1 week in November, so that she could come up and spend time with us in transition, which the board feels would be helpful to her and helpful to the district, and that's what the consulting agreement calls for. Her consulting pay will be her daily rate based on the annual salary that was approved by the board earlier at $232,000 per annum, and that'll of course be divided per day. With that as an explanation, any questions from the board? Any questions from the public on the recommended motion? Seeing none, back to the...
I have a question.
Seeing none from the public, back to the board. Mr. Llewellyn.
I just have a comment. I think it's a wonderful idea to have Dr. Tony come join us and work through these issues, because she'll ultimately be responsible for the delivery of what happens underneath them. One thing I do want to make a comment on, though, is that although there is a cost savings versus budget, and I understand that Dr. Title has a few days left that he kind of owes us for the prior agreement, I would like to be notified as a board before we go out of pocket for any days that may exceed what's remaining under his contract as in kind for what we provided to him under his departure. I think that in terms of the racial imbalance plan, I mean, there have been years that could have been worked on. So I think we should limit our expenditures there. But I support the amendment, or the motion that's on the table. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? If not, the recommended motion is that the Board of Education approve the consulting agreement dated October 4th, 2016 between the Fairfield Board of Education and Dr. Tony R. Jones. All in favor, please raise your hand. It is unanimous. Thank you very much. That's 8-0. And item number 7, approval of the minutes. The recommended motion that the Board of Education approve the minutes of the special meeting of September 22nd, 2016, which is shown in enclosure number 7. Mrs. Gerber moves. Mrs. Maxon Kennelly seconds. Any questions from the board on that matter? Seeing none, the Reading the motion again, that the Board of Education approve the minutes of the special meeting of September 22nd, 2016. All in favor, please raise your hand. Ms. Carnell, Mrs. Gerber, Mr. Dwyer, Mr. Calabrese, Ms. Pitko, Mrs. Maxon Kennelly, opposed? Abstentions? Mrs. Lou McCormick, Mr. Llewellyn. Thank you very much. 702, 602, that's right, 2. On to the superintendent's report, item number 8.
And I will be brief, Mr. Chairman. We did our official fall enrollment count on Friday, showing a total of 9,984 students enrolled. That's down 74 from the same time last year. These are the figures that will be reported to the State Department of Education and incorporated into our FY18 budget planning. I had the opportunity last week to join with several of our Fairfield new administrators at the CES training program for folks that are coming into new administrative roles, and I participated on a panel with some other superintendents where we got to tell them what we wish someone had told us when we were starting out in our leadership functions. And I should also mention that this group meets regularly with Mr. Coyne to discuss their entry plans and the challenges that they faced in their first year as a school leader. Third, as I mentioned earlier, I do continue to confer with Dr. Jones about a number of issues, including our early work on the budget, our work on the racial imbalance plan, and the district improvement plan that you saw tonight. So she and I are in close touch on all of those things. Finally, I'll mention that we began preliminary work on the fiscal 2018 budget with our central office leadership team, and I'll be talking with the principals and other district leaders on the same topic on Thursday, just to set the stage for the challenges ahead. The Board of Education will discuss your ideas and concerns for the budget at our October 18 regular meeting, and at that point we'll also present what we see as the budget calendar, how we're going to move through this, and when Dr. Jones will be able to be involved. That's it for me.
Any questions for our superintendent on the items mentioned? If not, committee liaison reports. Any committee liaison reports? Mrs. Gerber.
The Osborne Hill Building Committee met last week. They are going to cancel their October meeting and are having a special meeting November 10th. The bids will be coming in November 8th for the connector. Again, third time, hopefully will be a charm. And depending on what the bids are, either they will move forward with the connector, or if they need additional funding, they will then start the process of going to the Board of Selectmen, Board of Finance, and RTM. And the schedule is set up so that if they do have to go to the other town bodies, they would hopefully get approval by the end of December, which would allow enough time for the lead time to be able to start the project as soon as school is over in June. But maybe we'll get lucky and they won't need extra funding. So I will keep everyone posted.
Any other comments from people? Ms. Pitko.
SEPTIB's having their meeting tomorrow night at 7:30 at McKinley.
Thank you. Anything else? Members? Okay, thank you very much. Open board comment. Any comments from the board? Seeing none, I'll mention to you that at your table was it should have said draft 2017 BOE meeting dates. These won't be set until the December meeting following our organizational meeting. There are 2 dates regarding the quarterly report that I have not heard from the chair of the Board of Finance as to whether they can move the quarterly report to a different meeting so that it doesn't conflict with our scheduled meeting. These dates are, except for those 2 that'll be some in the 3rd quarter and the 4th quarter, are pretty set, subject, of course, to after the organizational meeting. And please don't distribute this to anybody lest they suddenly say, oh, this is a final document, because it is a draft document. It does. Oh, it says, okay, in big gray letters, not on top. Okay, good. You can distribute it to anybody you want because it says draft.
Oh, jeez.
Thank you very much.
I I didn't see it either.
You didn't see it either, right?
No.
Oh, good. I'm not alone. I'm not alone. Good, thank you. With no further business,
Oh,
the
wait,
rec...
Mr.
I'm
Dwyer, I
sorry.
didn't know if you wanted to mention October 24th.
Oh, that's right, too. I should have added that to my notes. October 24th will be here. After much discussion, trying to find a date that would be good and suitable for the next Board of Education town meeting format meeting, we've picked October 24th at 7:30 p.m. And so please put that on your calendars. I believe the PTAC has been notified of that, and if we can get other notifications and publicity out about that date, that would be good. Thank you for the reminder. Anything else on open board
Sorry,
comment?
where will that be?
I have to find a place, but it'll be, you know, it'll be at either one of the schools. I don't think it can be here because of a conflict with RTM. Any other comments? Thank you again, Mrs. Maxinelli, for that reminder. Hearing nothing, recommend a motion that this regular meeting of the Board of Education adjourn. Do I have a motion? Mrs. Gerber, seconded by Ms. Carnell. All in favor, please raise your hand. It is unanimous, 8-0. Thank you very much.